Welcome, welcome, you're here at Wizardium. Today we present to you what if Hogwarts Castle itself chose Harry and Hermione as champions. Like and subscribe if you want more awesome stories. Sit back, relax and enjoy. Chapter 1. The Goblet remembers the Great Hall had never been so loud, and that was saying something for a place that had survived 7 centuries of students, ghosts, and at least 3 catastrophic potions accidents that had never made it into any official record. Harry sat wedged between Ron and Hermione at the Gryffindor table, the Halloween feast spread before them in its usual impossible abundance. Roasted everything, steaming everything else, pumpkin juice in quantities that defied the size of the pitchers. Normally he would have appreciated it. Normally he would have been halfway through his second plate by now. But his eyes kept drifting to the front of the hall where the Goblet of Fire sat on its stone pedestal, behind a thick rope of age-yellowed silk, blue-white flames licking the air above it like something restless and alive. Tomorrow it would choose. "You're not eating," Hermione said without looking up from the small leather-bound book she'd propped against a water goblet, which was technically against her own rules about books at meals, but nobody pointed that out anymore. "I'm eating." "You've been moving that same roast potato around your plate for 10 minutes. Ron looked up with genuine curiosity. "Which potato, the round one or the long one?" "The round one," Hermione said. "I've been watching the long one," Ron said, nodding solemnly. "It hasn't moved either. There might be a conspiracy." Harry put his fork down. "I just keep thinking about it. The goblet, what happens tomorrow?" "What happens tomorrow," Hermione said, finally closing her book with the careful precision of someone who would never dog-ear a page under any circumstances, "is that 3 names come out, 1 from each school, and 3 students become champions, and none of those names are yours, and we can all get on with actually watching the tournament instead of worrying about it. You make it sound very simple. Most things are simpler than people make them." She picked up her pumpkin juice. "The complicated part is what comes after. The tasks themselves. By all historical accounts they're extraordinarily dangerous, and the death rate in the early 20th century alone." "Hermione, I'm just saying, watching is better than participating." She said it firmly, the way she said most things, as if the firmness of the delivery could make it more true. Across the hall, Fred and George were arm-wrestling over what appeared to be the last of the crystallized pineapple, their aging potion stunt from earlier in the week still fresh enough in memory that several students nearby were giving them the particular look reserved for people who had recently made spectacular idiots of themselves. The beards had only just fully faded. Dumbledore rose from the staff table. The hall went quiet with the particular efficiency of a crowd that has been waiting for something and finally got it. Even the candles seemed to hold still. "The moment has arrived," Dumbledore said, and his voice carried the way it always did, not loud exactly but present everywhere at once, filling corners and settling into the bones. "The Goblet of Fire is almost ready to make its decision. When the names are called, I ask that the champions make their way through that door." He gestured to the door to the right of the staff table, "where they will be given their initial instructions." He said a few more things. Harry stopped hearing them. The blue-white flames inside the goblet turned a deep, burning red. Something happened then that Harry would later struggle to describe accurately because it happened in layers. There was the visible part, which was the goblet turning red, and the first slip of parchment spinning upward on a tongue of flame. But underneath that, or maybe above it, or maybe threaded through it in a way that had nothing to do with direction, something shifted, like a very old door opening in a very deep part of a very large house. Harry felt it in his chest first, then behind his sternum, then everywhere at once, a pressure that wasn't quite uncomfortable, more like the feeling of a sound too low to hear but too strong to ignore. Hermione went very still beside him. Dumbledore caught the first piece of parchment. "The champion for Durmstrang," he read, his voice carrying perfect, practiced calm, "is Victor Krum." The Durmstrang table erupted. Krum stood with the unhurried ease of someone who had expected this, and found the expectation confirmed rather than exciting. He was already moving toward the side door when the Gryffindor table began its applause, polite and genuine, because even if you didn't like the man's Quidditch reputation, you had to respect the fact that the goblet itself had just chosen him, and that meant something. The flames went red again. "The champion for Beauxbatons," Dumbledore read from the second slip, "is Fleur de Lacre." The Beauxbatons girls shrieked with a collective delight that sent several nearby candles guttering. Fleur herself rose with her hair moving like something in a private wind, silver and light, and she walked to that side door with the specific grace of someone who was also, Harry thought, not very surprised. The flames turned red a third time. "The Hogwarts champion," Dumbledore said, and the hall held its breath with the totality of hundreds of people trying to look calm while actually being completely unable to breathe, "is Cedric Diggory." The Hufflepuff table lost their minds, completely and entirely lost their minds. Cedric stood amid what Harry could only describe as a human explosion of yellow-trimmed robes, grinning his wide, genuinely pleased grin, clapping people on the back as he moved through them toward the door. And that was it, 3 champions, tournament complete. The goblet's flames settled back toward their usual blue-white, and Dumbledore was already beginning to speak about the next stage of proceedings, and Ron was saying something into Harry's ear about Cedric being decent enough even if he was a Hufflepuff, and the feast noise was rebuilding around them, and the goblet went out, not dimmed, not faded. Out like someone had extinguished it with a thought, and in the sudden absence of its light the pedestal looked very old and very plain and very much like a piece of carved stone that had been sitting in one position for a very long time. Then it ignited, not red, not blue-white. Not any color Harry had vocabulary for. It was gold in the way that sunlight through closed eyelids is gold, saturating and complete, and the flames reached twice as high as they ever had, and the parchment that shot upward was already burning at its edges, and Dumbledore's hand moved to catch it with a speed that suggested his calm was more practiced than genuine. He read it. His face did something complicated. Controlled, always controlled, but the eyes, Dumbledore's eyes behind their half-moon glasses, did something Harry had never seen them do before, which was look genuinely, flatly surprised. He read it again. "Harry Potter," he said. The silence had a texture to it. Then it fractured, and it fractured badly into something loud and multidirectional and entirely uncontrolled. Harry didn't move. Ron turned to stare at him with an expression that had cycled through 4 different emotions in approximately 1 second. Hermione's hand came down on Harry's forearm with a grip that was tighter than she probably intended. "I didn't," Harry started. "I know," she said. "I didn't put my name in, Harry, I know." Her voice was steady, which helped. Everything else in the hall was not steady. He could see Malfoy laughing. Of course Malfoy was laughing, and the Durmstrang students looking affronted, and the Beauxbatons girls frowning, and Karkaroff already on his feet at the staff table, looking like a man who had swallowed something he deeply regretted. "Potter," McGonagall said, appearing from somewhere with the particular teleportation ability that senior Hogwarts professors seem to develop after sufficient years on the job, her voice pitched low and carrying the specific quality of someone who wanted very much to say several things and was selecting the least inflammatory option. "Go through the side door, now." Harry got up. The hall watched him do it. He kept his face neutral in the way he'd learned to keep it neutral when the Dursleys were watching for a reaction, and he walked through the door, and the noise of the hall muffled behind him. The room beyond was a small antechamber with a fireplace, and Cedric was there, and Krum was there, and Fleur was there, and they all looked at him with varying degrees of surprise that Harry didn't have the energy to navigate. He went to stand near the fireplace. "You entered?" Cedric asked. Not accusatory exactly, genuinely confused. "No," Harry said. "The goblet chose you, apparently." Krum looked at him with the dark, heavy-browed assessment of someone calculating. He said nothing. Fleur's expression cycled through several things before settling on something thoughtful. The door opened again. Harry turned, expecting McGonagall or Dumbledore or some ministry official already preparing their paperwork. Hermione walked through the door. She stopped in the center of the room and looked at all of them with the expression she wore when she'd just worked out a difficult problem, not triumph exactly, more like the particular clarity that comes after sustained effort. Her cheeks were slightly flushed. Her hands were completely steady. In Dumbledore's hand, still visible behind her as the door swung slowly shut, Harry could see the edge of a 5th piece of parchment. And the headmaster's expression had moved beyond surprise into something that Harry could only describe as reckoning. "Hermione," Harry said. "The goblet produced a 5th name," she said. She said it the way she said most things, clearly, precisely, without unnecessary drama, because the facts were dramatic enough on their own. "Mine, that's not possible," Fleur said. "The tournament has 3 schools, 3 champions." "Yes," Hermione agreed. "I'm aware of that." "The goblet cannot produce, and yet it did." Hermione looked at Harry. "When it went out, when the flames went gold, did you feel it?" "In my chest," he said, "like something opening." "Yes," she exhaled slowly. "Me too." The door to the hall burst open with the efficiency of important people who have been waiting an appropriate amount of time to be important. Dumbledore came first, then Ludo Bagman in his purple robes, then Crouch SR, moving with the stiff deliberateness of someone who had spent decades being the most authoritative person in any given room. McGonagall behind them, and Karkaroff and Madame Maxime, and the particular atmosphere of a situation rapidly becoming political. Bagman looked at Harry with an expression that suggested he found this wonderful. "Extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary." 2 champions from Hogwarts, well, it's unprecedented, isn't it? Bartemius, completely without. "The goblet has made an error," Karkaroff said. His accent made the words crisp like something cut with a blade. 2 champions from the host school creates an obvious and unacceptable advantage. "The Goblet of Fire does not make errors," Dumbledore said quietly. "Then it has been tampered with, I can assure you." "You cannot assure me of anything, Dumbledore, when my student is disadvantaged by—" "Victor Krum is an international Quidditch star," Hermione said. Everyone looked at her. She met Karkaroff's gaze with the particular equanimity of someone who had been talked over in classrooms for years and had developed very effective methods for reclaiming space. "He is the most famous athlete in your entire delegation, possibly in Europe. He is physically extraordinary, magically accomplished, and has the crowd's complete attention before the first task has even been announced. I don't think Victor Krum is the disadvantaged party in this room." Krum looked at her. Something in his expression shifted just slightly, a recalibration, and he said nothing. Be that as it may, Crouch said, with the voice of someone who had learned to talk over emotion through sheer bureaucratic repetition, the rules of the tournament are clear. The Goblet of Fire is a binding magical contract. When it produces a name, it produced 5 names, Dumbledore said. It produced 4 names, one for each school, and then an anomaly, Hermione repeated, and her voice was very dry. Miss Granger. Crouch turned to her with the specific courtesy of a man who is being patient because he has chosen to be and could choose otherwise. I don't doubt your abilities. But what the goblet produced is without precedent, and without precedent means without framework, and without framework means without rules that say I can't compete, she said. The silence had a quality to it. She's right, Harry said. If there's no precedent, there's no rule that excludes her, and the goblet chose her. You sound very confident for someone who also should not be competing, Karkaroff said with the particular coldness of a man aiming for a target. I am competing, Harry said. He said it flatly, without heat, just as a statement of available facts. The goblet chose me, and I'm 17 months under the age line, and I didn't enter my own name, and I'm still standing in this room. So I think we've established that the goblet's choice carries more authority than the rules written around it. Bagman's grin was enormous. He was clearly having the time of his life. Dumbledore had been watching Harry and Hermione with an expression that Harry couldn't fully read. There was approval in it, or something adjacent to approval, and something else deeper and more careful that Harry had learned to notice without being able to name. The headmaster looked at Crouch. I believe, Dumbledore said, that we are looking at a binding magical contract for 5 champions. The goblet is not lit, it has made its selections, they are made. Albus Bartemius. Dumbledore's tone didn't change, but something about it settled the room the way a keystone settles an arch, quietly, finally, without drama. We have a tournament to run. Crouch's jaw worked. He looked at his parchments. He looked at the extinguished goblet visible through the open doorway, cold and dark and done. He looked at Harry and Hermione. 5 champions, he said at last, as though reading a sentence he found personally offensive. Scoring will need to be recalibrated. Judging criteria adjusted. He began making notes. He was, whatever else he was, a man who defaulted to administration when the situation exceeded him. Fleur was watching Hermione with the look of someone reassessing a thing they had already categorized. You are 4th year, yes, and you believe you can compete in the Triwizard Tournament as a 4th-year student. I don't believe it, Hermione said. I've been selected for it. Those aren't the same thing. Fleur considered this. Then, with the smallest possible curve at the corner of her mouth, no, I suppose they are not. Cedric caught Harry's eye and gave him a look that communicated several things at once, something like, well, this is a lot, and something like, I believe you didn't put your name in, and something like, good luck, I suppose we're all going to need it. Harry gave him a small nod back. The instructions were brief. First task in a month's time, wand weighing ceremony in 2 days. Champions were to tell no one what the task involved if they discovered it ahead of time. Champions were to present themselves to Madame Pomfrey the following morning for a health assessment, the purpose of which Bagman described as routine, with an enthusiasm that made it sound anything but. When they were dismissed, Harry and Hermione walked back through the door into the great hall together. The noise hit them like a physical thing. Most of it was surprise. A good portion was excitement. Some of it, particularly from the Slytherin end, was something Harry had learned to identify as malice wearing the costume of entertainment. He scanned the room in the time it took to walk 3 steps and located Ron's face, which was doing something complicated and layered. They sat back down. The goblet produced a 5th name, Ron said. Yes, said Hermione, your name. Also yes, Ron looked at Harry, and yours. Apparently we've established that. So you're both champions. Both of you, both. He seemed to be running the words through a quality check on each pass. How? We don't know, Harry said. The castle, Neville said from across the table very quietly. Harry looked at him. Neville had gone slightly pale, the way he sometimes went when he was thinking something that he suspected was true but wasn't sure he should say. I felt something before the goblet went gold, like the building moved. He looked at Harry. Did anyone else feel it? Like the whole place just breathed. Nobody answered him immediately. Then Dean said slowly, I thought it was the crowd, everyone shifting at once. It wasn't the crowd, Hermione said. She picked up her pumpkin juice. Her hand was steady. Harry looked at her hand specifically because he needed something steady to look at, and she always provided that. The castle is very old, she said. The enchantments in the stonework go back, well, we don't entirely know how far they go back. The founders built on something that was already here. That's in Hogwarts, a history, though most people stop reading before that chapter. What does that mean? Ron asked. I don't know yet, Hermione said, but I'm going to find out. Harry went to bed that night expecting the whirring, sleepless anxiety that usually accompanied unwanted attention. Instead, he found something different, not calm exactly, but a kind of settled purposefulness. Something had chosen him, not accident. Not prophecy he'd had no hand in, not someone else's agenda wearing his face. The castle itself had reached through its ancient complicated magic and put his name in the fire, and whatever it thought it was doing, he was going to figure out what that was, and he was going to compete, and he was going to win. He was asleep before he'd finished deciding it. Morning arrived with the specific brutality of mornings that follow extraordinary events, the ordinary world still present and demanding attention, breakfast still necessary, classes still theoretically happening, and the entire student body of Hogwarts Castle having an opinion about the events of the previous evening that they were largely incapable of keeping to themselves. By the time Harry made it to breakfast, 3 different Hufflepuffs had told him that he'd cheated. One Ravenclaw had asked him very politely and academically how exactly he'd managed it, and a second-year Slytherin had said something under his breath that Harry had chosen not to hear. Hermione was already at breakfast with a stack of books that she had clearly retrieved from the library before most people were awake. Crookshanks was wound around her ankles under the table. She had a piece of toast in one hand and was reading with the total absorption of a person who has found a trail and intends to follow it wherever it goes. "Anything?" Harry asked, sitting down. "Lots of things," she said without looking up. "None of them quite right yet. The goblet's history is well documented up to about 400 years ago, and then it gets murkier. There are references to it being modified, calibrated, some sources say, to account for the modern school system. But before that modification, before it was restructured to accept entries from competing schools, it was something else." She turned a page. "It was a Hogwarts artifact, specifically, created here by the founders, or more accurately by," she tapped the page, "by the castle's own magical substrate, which is a phrase I've seen in exactly 2 sources and which neither of them explains." "The castle's own magical substrate," Harry repeated. "The stone itself. The enchantments aren't just in the spells that were cast on the building. The building is the spell. It's been here long enough and had enough magic poured into it that it has its own presence, its own awareness, maybe in a limited sense." "Limited?" Hermione finally looked up. She had the expression she sometimes got when a thing was too interesting to be entirely reassuring. "The castle has always been able to move staircases, hide rooms, produce what students need when they need it. We've always attributed that to residual enchantment, leftover magic behaving semi-autonomously. But what if it's not residual?" She set the book down. "What if it's deliberate?" Harry thought about it. He thought about the room of requirement, the first time he'd found it, the urgency of needing somewhere to hide a cabinet, the room appearing exactly as it needed to be. He thought about the moving staircases and the way they sometimes felt less like malfunctioning architecture and more like an architecture that was gently steering. He thought about the feeling in his chest the night before when the goblet had gone dark. "So the castle chose us," he said. "The castle chose us." She picked up her toast again. "The question is why. Does it matter if we're competing?" "It always matters why," she said. "Understanding why something happens is the difference between being prepared and being surprised, and I don't like being surprised." Ron arrived at breakfast in the middle of this, dropped into his seat, looked at the stack of books, looked at Hermione, looked at Harry and said, "You two have been at it since dawn, haven't you?" "She has," Harry said. "I just got here." "Same difference." Ron helped himself to bacon. He was doing the thing where he was being normal, deliberately, the specific deliberate normality of someone who has complicated feelings they haven't worked out yet and is managing them by pretending not to have them. Harry knew that look. He'd been on the receiving end of it before. He let it sit for now. The post owls arrived in their usual morning flood, and with them came something Harry had not anticipated, his own personal post. It was substantial. 17 letters in the first wave, more arriving on the heels of the first owls before he'd even had a chance to register the initial volume. He opened the first one, which was from someone at the Daily Prophet he'd never heard of requesting an exclusive interview. The second was from a reader of the Daily Prophet who wanted him to know that they thought he was a disgrace and a cheat. The third was from a different reader of the Daily Prophet who thought he was extraordinarily brave and had included a drawing of him. The fourth was from Sirius. He set the others aside and opened Sirius's letter quickly. Harry saw the late edition, had some choice words for the paper it was printed on. "Write me immediately and tell me what actually happened. I want your version, not Skeeter's, not the Ministry's, not whatever Dumbledore is ready to say publicly. Yours. And Harry, whatever happened, however it happened, be careful. The last time your name came out of something without your permission, it was because someone wanted you in a position they controlled. Find out who benefits from you being in this tournament. Sirius PS, tell Hermione I said well done." The Daily Prophet's face when they reported the 5th name was something I would have paid to see. Harry folded the letter. He'd write back tonight. But the middle paragraph sat in him in a way that wasn't comfortable. Find out who benefits from you being in this tournament. Because the answer, if it was Voldemort's people pulling strings, if it was Crouch or someone acting through Crouch, the answer would be that someone benefited from Harry reaching the end, reaching the third task, reaching whatever was at the center of whatever was being planned. But the goblet had gone out first. And then it had come back gold, not red, and produced 2 names instead of 1. If someone had tampered with the goblet, they hadn't planned for Hermione. He looked at her across the table. She was making notes now, moving between 3 books with the efficient purposefulness of a general planning a campaign. She hadn't touched her toast in 4 minutes. Crookshanks was still winding around her ankles. "Hermione," he said, "Sirius thinks someone tampered with the goblet to get me in." "Sirius is probably right, but they didn't plan for you." She looked up. "No," she said slowly, "they didn't." She held his gaze for a moment. "Which means whatever plan they had for this tournament, I am comprehensively not a part of it, and I intend to stay that way. You think we should tell Dumbledore about the castle, about what we felt?" "I think Dumbledore already knows something," she said. He didn't look surprised by my name in the way he looked surprised by yours. He looked surprised in a different way, like he was surprised it was now. Harry chewed on that, like he was expecting it eventually, like he was expecting the possibility and hadn't decided how to feel about the reality. She closed the book nearest her. I want to understand it before I talk to him. I don't want to walk into a conversation with Dumbledore with gaps in my own knowledge. He's very good at filling gaps with his narrative instead of yours. From somewhere behind them, unmistakably and carrying the distance-covering capacity of someone who had never learned to use their indoor voice, Lavender Brown said, I still think it's incredibly unfair to Cedric. Cedric doesn't seem bothered, Parvati replied. That's because Cedric is nice. Cedric, said Seamus from further down, would probably beat both of them anyway. Harry took a piece of toast and ate it with equanimity, because if he responded to every opinion about him that was conducted at conversational volume within his hearing radius, he would do nothing else with his time. The wand-weighing ceremony was scheduled for that afternoon, and when they arrived at the small classroom that had been set aside for it, all 5 champions already present, Harry noted the way the dynamic had shifted overnight from what it had been in the antechamber. Krum had developed an air of careful assessment that hadn't been there before. Fleur's attention kept returning to Hermione with the considering look of someone revising an opinion. Cedric was easy and straightforward in the way he always was. He caught Harry's eye and said simply, first task's going to be something, isn't it? And when Harry said probably, Cedric grinned and said good like he meant it. The wand examination was conducted by Ollivander, who arrived with his characteristic quality of being somewhere and then suddenly being there more completely, his pale eyes moving between the champions with the attention of a man who had made it his life's work to understand the specific relationship between a wand and its wizard. He examined each wand in turn, making quiet sounds of assessment. When he came to Hermione's vine wood and dragon heartstring, he went very still for a moment. Remarkable, he said softly, not to her specifically, to the wand. Is something wrong with it? Hermione asked. Wrong. Ollivander looked at her as if she'd said something interesting in a foreign language. No, this wand has been listening, I think is the closest word, for a very long time. Vinewood wands choose owners of exceptional purpose. He turned it in his fingers, and dragon heartstring is responsive to power, both kinds, raw and earned. He handed it back. This wand suits you remarkably well, Miss Granger. I suspect it has always known you'd end up somewhere like this. Hermione took it back carefully. Rita Skeeter materialized from the corner where she'd been hovering with her quick quotes quill, and Harry had approximately 3 seconds to register her presence before she was maneuvering him toward a broom cupboard for a private interview that he had not agreed to. He planted his feet. I'm not doing an interview, he said. Skeeter smiled the smile of someone who had dealt with reluctant subjects for decades. Now, Harry, that's not my name, he said pleasantly. My name is Potter, and I'm not doing an interview with you or anyone else. The public has a right to know. The public has a right to know what I do in the tournament, which they'll see when I do it. He took a step back from her, which put him beside Hermione, who had also declined Skeeter's earlier overtures with a precision that had left the reporter slightly wrong-footed. Good afternoon, Miss Skeeter. He walked away. He could feel her watching them both. Skeeter was the least of his worries, and he knew it, but there was something in the act of simply not engaging, of deciding that he controlled what he revealed, and when that felt like a small, important exercise of something. Muscle maybe, or will, he was going to need both. That evening in the common room, Hermione spread her notes across the hearthrug and Harry sat across from her while the fire warmed the backs of their hands and the common room moved around them with the selective deafness of people trying very hard not to eavesdrop while absolutely eavesdropping. What we know, Hermione said. The goblet is a Hogwarts artifact, older than the tournament's modern incarnation. Before it was calibrated for school competition, its purpose was different. I think it was a sorting mechanism, but not for houses. Something older, something the founders built to identify. She paused, tapping her quill against her notes. I keep finding this phrase, those in whom the castle's purpose continues. The castle's purpose, Harry said. What's the castle's purpose? Learning, she said immediately. Then, no, more than that. I think Hogwarts was built to be a place where something was preserved. Not just knowledge, magic itself in a specific sense. British wizarding magic, the old kind. More actions request aborted. Right, the next chapter now. The Castle's Choice Chapter 2. Weight of Stone. The first official champions meeting was held in a ground floor classroom that smelled of chalk dust and old ambition, which Harry thought was probably appropriate. Bagman was already there when they arrived, beaming in the way he always beamed, the specific effervescence of a man who had never really left the Quidditch pitch behind, who still treated large public events as things that happened to him rather than things he was professionally responsible for organizing. He'd rearranged the desks into a rough semicircle and was standing at the front of it as though this were a lesson and he the teacher, which suggested a level of authority Harry was not entirely convinced he possessed. Crouch arrived 30 seconds after the champions, looked at the semicircle of desks with the expression of a man who found informal arrangements professionally offensive, and sat in the teacher's chair with the deliberateness of someone reasserting a hierarchy. Fleur came in with two other Beauxbaton students who turned out not to be staying once Crouch told them this meeting was for champions only. Crumb arrived alone. Cedric arrived with a Hufflepuff friend who received the same treatment, and he shrugged with the easy accommodation of someone who hadn't really expected anything different and sat down. Harry and Hermione sat together on the left side of the semicircle. This was not a conscious decision exactly, more like the natural consequence of having spent 4 years making most decisions about where to sit together. Ron was not in the room, which was something Harry was filing away to deal with later, in the complicated folder labeled things about Ron that I understand but still don't enjoy. Right, Bagman said, clapping his hands together. Fantastic, all 5 of you, magnificent, now then. He looked briefly uncertain about what came after now then recovered. The first task is designed to test your daring, your nerve, and your powers of transfiguration. You will face the task on the 24th of November, and you will do so without your textbooks, without your school bags, and without prior warning as to what you will face. You are each permitted your wand, that's all. That's all, Cedric said mildly. That's all, Bagman confirmed, as if this were a reassurance. Crouch had been reading through papers while Bagman talked. He looked up now with the specific attention of someone who had been listening despite the performance of not listening. Each champion will be observed and scored by each of the 4 judges. Scores will be awarded for magical ability, originality, composure, and overall success in completing the task. He looked around the semicircle. His gaze paused on Harry and Hermione in a way that was carefully neutral. Given the unprecedented 5-champion configuration, scoring has been recalibrated. The 2 Hogwarts champions will be assessed individually, with their scores averaged for Hogwarts standing in the inter-school competition, while their individual scores remain separate for personal ranking purposes. So Hogwarts could win the tournament and lose it simultaneously, Hermione said. Crouch looked at her, in a manner of speaking. That's an interesting incentive structure, she said, writing something in her notebook. It means Harry and I have a reason to help each other. Good individual scores benefit us both in the school standings, but also a reason to compete for personal ranking. It creates a quite elegant tension. Bagman looked delighted by this analysis. Crouch looked as though he was not sure whether to be impressed or suspicious. Karkaroff, who had materialized in the doorway at some point in the preceding minute, looked like he'd bitten something sour. Are we permitted to discuss the tasks with each other? Fleur asked. The champions, I mean, between ourselves. You're permitted to discuss anything you like with anyone you like, Bagman said. What you're not permitted to do is receive assistance from students or faculty in preparing for the task itself. Define assistance, Hermione said. Crouch set his papers down with a care that suggested he was choosing not to slam them. Miss Granger, research, preparation, practice, all of your own effort is not assistance. Another student or professor actively aiding your preparation in a direct and specific capacity would constitute assistance and is prohibited. So I can use the library, you can use the library, and practice spells. Independently, yes, and consult published sources of any kind. Yes. Good, she said, and wrote something else. Crumb had been watching this exchange with the steady, unreadable attention of someone filing information. He hadn't said anything since sitting down. Harry found himself reassessing the Bulgarian, not the Quidditch star, not the famous face, but the person underneath it, who had arrived here as the obvious favorite, and was now in a room with someone who cross-examined tournament officials about rule definitions before the first task had been announced. Crumb looked like he was finding this interesting rather than annoying, which moved him several places up in Harry's estimation. Are there any other questions? Bagman asked. There were not formally, though the room had the particular texture of people sitting with things they weren't yet ready to ask. They filed out into the corridor. Karkaroff caught up with Crumb and said something in rapid Bulgarian that had the quality of a directive rather than a conversation. Crumb responded in 3 words that seemed to end the conversation to his own satisfaction more than his headmaster's. Madame Maxime swept past with the magnificent self-possession of a woman who had decided to be unbothered and was very good at it. In the corridor outside, Cedric fell into step with Harry. Right, Cedric said. So how worried should I be? About the task? About all of it? Cedric said it without edge, just honest assessment. I walked into this thinking I'd be one of 3. Now I'm one of 5, and 2 of the 5 are. He glanced at Harry and Hermione without finishing the sentence, apparently deciding that finishing it would be either rude or inaccurate or both. A what? Harry said. Cedric considered. I watched you in 2nd year, he said. The air of Slytherin business. You were 12 and you faced whatever was in that chamber and came out. And Hermione, he looked at her over Harry's shoulder. There's a reason Fleur already looks at you differently than she looked at you yesterday. Fleur looks at me like she's recalibrating something, Hermione said from behind them, which confirmed she'd been listening to this entire exchange with the serene attention of someone who sees no reason to pretend otherwise. Right, said Cedric. That's what I mean. He looked back at Harry. I'm not saying this to be dramatic. I'm just saying I went into this expecting to compete with 2 excellent students from other schools. Now I'm competing with you 2 as well. I thought you should know I noticed. That's either very honest or very strategic, Harry said. Cedric grinned. Maybe both. He turned at the corridor junction. Good luck on the 24th. Harry watched him go. There was something genuinely uncomplicated about Cedric Diggory that Harry found, in the current landscape of complications, almost restful. "He's good," Hermione said. "Yeah, we shouldn't underestimate him. I wasn't planning to. I know, I was reminding myself." She pulled her cloak tighter. The November air was getting into the castle in the way November air always did at Hogwarts, not through the windows, which were spelled against the weather, but through some structural quality of the stone itself, as though the building chose to acknowledge the season. "I've been thinking about the first task." "You've been thinking about the first task since they announced there was going to be a first task." "Fair, I've been thinking about it more specifically since this morning." She glanced around the corridor. "Hagrid usually knows what creatures are being used in things, and the Forbidden Forest is likely where they'd be kept." Harry looked at her. "You want to go look in the Forbidden Forest? I want to know what we're facing. There's a difference between looking and blundering." She met his eyes. "The goblet chose us. I'd like to think it didn't choose us to be unprepared. The goblet didn't leave us any notes on what it expected." "No," she said, "it left us ourselves." She said it matter-of-factly, as though this was sufficient, and then she walked ahead because she had somewhere to be, and Harry followed because he usually did, and also because she was right. 3 days before the first task, they found out about the dragons. It wasn't through any particularly heroic act of intelligence gathering. It was Hagrid, who had never in living memory successfully kept a secret when presented with someone he was genuinely fond of, and who had invited Harry down to his hut with the specific energy of someone sitting on news they were physically unable to contain. Hermione came too. She often came to Hagrid's these days in a way she hadn't always, because the thing about Hermione was that she went wherever the relevant information was, and Hagrid, bless him, was frequently the most relevant source of specific, practical magical creature knowledge available. They came around the edge of the forest in the blue dark of a November evening, and Hagrid waved them over with the urgency of someone who'd been watching for them. He pulled them past the pumpkin patch, through a gate in the fence, and into the forest's margin. It was about 50 meters in, past the first serious press of trees, that they heard it, not so much a sound as a pressure. Something large and hot and fundamentally disinterested in the smallness of humans, radiating outward from a clearing ahead where the trees thinned enough to see a ring of staked-out territory, and within it, 4 creatures that rewrote the word large into something that had previously required no rewriting. "Dragons," Hermione said. She said it the way she said most things, clearly, with information already arriving around it. Her head was tilted slightly. She was already looking at them with the concentrated attention of someone filing everything. The nearest dragon was a Swedish short snout, blue-grey and compact, with the particular alertness of an apex predator in unfamiliar territory. Beyond it, a common Welsh green paced a circuit of its staked area. Further out, something enormous and red that could only be a Chinese fireball. Harry found the 4th one on the far side of the clearing. It was black, and it was bigger than the others, and it had bronze-colored horns that caught the fading light, and it was watching him. It was watching him with the flat, yellow intelligence of something that knew exactly how dangerous it was. "That's a Hungarian horntail," Hermione said softly. "I know, it's considered the most dangerous dragon breed in Europe." "Hermione, I know, I'm just," she exhaled, processing. "How are ye both feelin'?" Hagrid asked from somewhere behind them. He sounded faintly guilty about the dragons in the way he sometimes sounded faintly guilty about creatures that other people found distressing, which was not enough guilt to have prevented him from showing them the dragons, but enough to make him feel he should check in afterward. "Fine," Harry said. "Nervous," Hagrid pressed, because Hagrid often needed people to be more nervous so that he could comfort them. "Not really," Harry said honestly. He looked at the horntail, it looked back. Neither of them moved. "It's a task, we face it, we figure out how. Each champion's gonna have to get past one of them," Hagrid said. "Get past 'em and get something, don't know what exactly." "We should go," Hermione said. She turned away from the clearing with the decisiveness of someone who has gathered what they came for. "Hagrid, thank you, please don't mention we were here to anyone." "Course not," Hagrid said with the sincerity of a man who had already told 3 people about the dragons but didn't count Harry and Hermione because they were different. Walking back, Hermione was quiet for the first minute, which was a specific kind of quiet Harry recognized, not distressed, not frightened, but deeply occupied. He waited. "Past the dragon," she said. "Get something the dragon is guarding. Eggs, probably, it's what they're most protective of. A golden egg among the clutch would be the obvious choice, so we need to get close enough to a dragon to retrieve something from its nest. Yes, the question is how." She was walking quickly now, the way she walked when her brain was running ahead of her feet. "Transfiguration, possibly, if you could create a sufficient distraction, or a summoning charm for the object itself if the object can be summoned. Broom, if you could get into the air before the dragon reacted." "I'm good on a broom," Harry said. "You're exceptional on a broom," she said without any particular emphasis, as if this was simply a fact that belonged in the sentence. "I'm not exceptional on a broom, I'm adequate. Adequate won't be enough for this." She was quiet for another moment. "I'll transfigure. I'm thinking large-scale conjunctivitis, something that affects the dragon's vision and forces it to protect its eyes rather than track me. If I can get it distracted and temporarily disoriented, I can retrieve the egg. She paused. Though a dragon's hide is thick enough to resist most spells, I'll need to aim for the face specifically. That's an extremely close approach, Harry said. Yes, she said simply. It is. He looked at her sideways. She was looking ahead, calculating, her breath fogging slightly in the cold air. She wasn't frightened. That was the thing about Hermione that most people missed. They assumed that because she was careful and prepared and methodical, she was frightened and using preparation as armor against it. They were wrong. She was careful the way a good climber is careful, not because the height scared her, but because she respected the drop. We could help each other, he said. During the task, we're competing individually, but there's nothing in the rules that says we'd lose points for it, she said immediately. The judges would factor in mutual assistance and we shouldn't need it. She glanced at him. I'll face mine, you'll face yours, we'll compare notes afterward. A small pause, but knowing you're out there facing yours while I'm facing mine, that's not nothing. No, he agreed, it's not nothing. They came out of the trees. The castle rose before them against the darkening sky, its towers lit from within, the windows amber warm against the November blue, and Harry felt it again, very faintly this time, the briefest possible suggestion of that sensation from the night of the goblet. Like a building noticing you, like a structure with enough accumulated purpose to have something resembling attention. He looked up at it. It's watching, he said, not asking. Probably, Hermione said. I think it's been watching for a long time. She pushed open the door. Come on, I need to write up a research plan and you need to practice a summoning charm that could pull an egg out of a dragon's nest at 50 feet. That's specific, approximately specific. She held the door. Akio works on most objects regardless of size if you can calculate the trajectory correctly. The problem will be if the egg is nested under other eggs, in which case you'd need, Hermione, can we eat dinner first and then have the dragon plan? She considered this. Fine, yes, dinner first. The Yule Ball announcement came 2 weeks before the first task, slipped into the week like something that had been waiting for a gap in the schedule and seized it. Professor McGonagall informed the fourth years with the efficiency of someone who found the topic tolerable but not her natural territory, explained that the ball was a Triwizard tradition, that it was open to fourth years and above, that the champions were required to attend and required to open the dancing, and that robes were to be dress robes of an appropriate standard. She looked directly at Harry and Ron when she said appropriate standard, which Harry thought was probably not aimed at him specifically, but was very much aimed at Ron, and the dragonskin orange dress robes that Mrs. Weasley had sent, which had already prompted Hermione to make several thoughtful faces in their direction. In the following days, the corridor outside the Gryffindor common room became a site of ongoing social activity that Harry found mostly baffling. People were asking each other to the ball in the spaces between classes with the urgency of a separate, parallel competition happening at the same time as the actual tournament, and several Gryffindor girls had started looking at Harry with the specific expression of people deciding whether to say something. He preemptively avoided the situation by being in the library most evenings with Hermione, who was preemptively avoiding it by being absorbed in research. It was on a Tuesday evening a week before the task that Crumb appeared in the library. This was not unusual. Crumb had been using the same library at the same hours for the past week and a half, always sitting alone, always with a small stack of books that he worked through with methodical quiet. Harry had noticed him. Hermione had noticed him, made a note and said nothing. Tonight, though, Crumb walked past his usual table and stopped beside theirs. He looked at Hermione. Not with the assessing quality of the first night or the recalibrating look of the champions meeting, something more direct. May I, he said, and gestured at the chair across from her. Hermione looked up from her notes. She looked at him for a moment with the evaluating patience of someone who takes people at face value until given a reason not to. Of course, she said. He sat. He put his own book on the table, Dracology of the Eastern Provinces, thick and annotated, and opened it, but he didn't read immediately. You are studying the dragon, he said. We both are, Hermione said. I know. He looked at Harry. You will use a broom. Harry considered denying it and then saw no particular reason to. Probably. Good choice, fast and responsive. Crumb said it like a man assessing equipment. I am considering an eye curse, conjunctivitis. The vision is the weakness. Hermione's pen stopped moving. She looked at him. He looked back. That's what I was planning, she said. Yes, he said. I thought so when I saw you working. He was quiet for a moment. I am not trying to copy. I am saying we are thinking the same way, which means it is probably the right way. He looked back at his book. There is a variant of the conjunctivitis curse that has an area effect, a pulse rather than a directed beam. Less accurate but harder for the dragon to move away from. Page 314. Hermione found page 314. She read it. Harry watched her read it. Her eyes went through 3 passes the way they did when she was checking herself, and then she looked up. This requires a specific one motion. It's not standard. No, Crumb agreed. I have been practicing. So will I, she said. There was a brief, comfortable quiet. Outside the library's high windows, November rain was doing its quiet thing against the glass. You are 4th year, Crumb said to Hermione. Yes, the tournament has killed students with more experience. I know, she said it simply without bravado or deflection. I've read the historical records. I know exactly how dangerous this is, and you are not afraid. Hermione looked at him steadily. I'm not afraid of the task, she said. I'm afraid of being unprepared. Those aren't the same thing. One I can do something about. Crumb considered this for a long moment, then he nodded once, the minimal, efficient nod of someone who finds a thing worth acknowledging and doesn't see a reason to elaborate. He returned to his book. He stayed for an hour. When he left, he said goodnight in English to both of them, and Hermione watched him go with an expression that had moved from evaluation to something more like respect. "He's good," Harry said. "He's very good," she agreed. "He's also genuinely decent, I think, which makes him more dangerous than if he were unpleasant, because you can discount an unpleasant person." She gathered her notes. "We should practice tonight. The summoning charm, have you been working on it?" "Every evening." "The corridor outside the 7th floor, the one with the tapestry of Barnabas the Balmy," he smiled. "After 10, when the corridors are quiet." "After 10, she agreed. They practiced in the dark corridor with the castle around them making its night sounds, the groan of settling stone, the distant patter of ghosts doing whatever ghosts did at 11 o'clock, the warm draft that came from no identifiable source but always smelled slightly of something burning in a good way, like a fire in a grate on a cold evening. Harry practiced the summoning charm on objects of increasing size and weight that Hermione transfigured from chalk she'd brought from the classroom supply cupboard, small at first, then larger, then awkwardly shaped, then weighted down with a charm she applied to simulate the resistance of a nested egg. "Accio," he said, for what felt like the 40th time. The weighted chalk egg skidded across the stone floor from 20 feet away, corrected its trajectory when it hit an uneven flagstone and arrived at his hand. He caught it without looking at it. He was watching the ceiling, specifically a point on the ceiling, imagining 60 feet of altitude and a dragon that was not going to hold still. "Higher ceiling," Hermione said. "You'll be approaching from above, not level. The arc needs to compensate." "I know. I'm adjusting for the weight differential matters when the arc isn't flat. At steep angles you need." "Hermione, I know." He turned and found her approximately 5 feet closer than she'd been, which was a habit of hers when she was tracking something carefully. She walked toward the focus of her attention without noticing she was doing it. "I've been thinking about the approach angle for a week. I know the weight differential." She stopped, blinked. "Sorry, yes, you do." She stepped back, looked briefly at herself, and then said, "Show me the arc then." He showed her the arc. It was correct. She checked it against a calculation she'd done on a piece of parchment, looked slightly surprised, and then did not say what she'd expected to find. "That's right," she said instead. "Thank you. Don't be smug about it." "I'm not being smug, I'm being correct. There's a fine line." But she was almost smiling, which meant they were fine. They were usually fine. That was the durable, specific thing about the two of them. She practiced the conjunctivitis variant Crumb had shown them. She was not naturally given to combat spells. Her instincts ran toward precision and structure, toward the kind of magic that assembled things rather than disrupted them. But she had never been someone who let her instincts limit her range. She practiced with the focused repetition of someone who will not stop until the thing is correct, which meant they were there until close to midnight, at which point she hit the target, a transfigured stone bust of an indeterminate historical figure wearing a hat with a conjunctivitis pulse that spread in a 6-foot arc and sent the bust skidding backward into the wall. They looked at each other. "That'll do it," Harry said, "if I can hold my nerve close enough." She looked at her wand. Then she looked at the corridor around them, at the familiar dark walls and the suit of armor at the far end that had been waving at them sporadically throughout their session, at the tapestry of Barnabas the Balmy and his performing bears, at the ceiling, the stone vaulting, the faint warmth in the air that had no source. "Do you think it knows?" she said softly. "The castle, do you think it watches this?" "I think it pays attention to things that matter to it," Harry said. He didn't know where the certainty came from exactly. Instinct maybe, or the feeling in his chest that had never entirely gone away since the night of the goblet. "And I think we matter to it. I've been reading about the founders," she said, "specifically about Gryffindor and what he said about why the school existed. There's a phrase in the original founding charter, what's left of it, that I keep coming back to." She was quiet for a moment. "He said Hogwarts was built to be a home for those who would defend magic itself, not just study it, defend it." "Defend it from what?" "From being forgotten," she said. "From being hollowed out, from becoming ritualized without being understood, performed without being felt." She looked at him. "I think that's why the castle chose us. I think it looked at what's coming." She paused, and the pause had weight, and decided it needed people who actually understand what they're doing. "Who feel it." Harry was quiet for a moment. "You think Voldemort is coming back?" "I think someone is trying to use this tournament to bring him back," she said. "And I think the castle knows it, and I think whoever tampered with the goblet didn't account for two of us." They stood in the corridor for a long moment, the castle breathing quietly around them, the suit of armor watching politely from its post. "Right," Harry said. He picked up his bag. "Then we'd better be very good." "We will be," she said. She said it without any performance. Just a statement of available facts, the way she always said things, which Harry had discovered years ago was more reassuring than any amount of enthusiasm. They walked back toward the common room, and somewhere below them, in the deep structure of the walls, in the old places where the stone remembered being quarried and laid, and spelled into something that thought, something settled. Like a place that has been waiting for something and recognizes it at last arriving. The night before the first task, Harry couldn't sleep. He lay in the dark listening to the slow breathing of his roommates, looking at the ceiling, and let himself feel the shape of tomorrow, the size of it, the noise and the crowds and the dragon and the thing he needed to do. He felt ready. He checked himself against that feeling carefully, looking for wishful thinking inside it, and found something more solid than hope. He had prepared, he had practiced every night for 2 weeks. He had flown his firebolt in patterns that accounted for a dragon's wingspan and reaction speed. He had the arc, the distance, the weight differential. He had Hermione's voice in his head running calculations like a compass running true north. He was ready. He thought about the castle, about what Hermione had said. He thought about what it might mean to be chosen not because of prophecy, not because of someone else's plans for him, but because a very old building had looked at the situation and decided he was the right person for it. There was something about that, something different about being chosen by a place rather than a person, that felt less like fate and more like recognition. He wasn't a symbol. He wasn't a piece on someone's board. He was a fourth year who could fly, who could summon things, who had faced worse than a dragon before and walked out of it. And he was competing because the oldest magic in Britain had looked at him and said, "Yes, you." He rolled over and slept. In the morning the weather was grey and wild, the wind off the lake strong enough to make the castle's towers creak at their joins, and the whole school moved through breakfast with the contained electricity of people who are about to watch something extraordinary. Harry ate everything on his plate. Hermione, across from him, ate with the calm efficiency of someone fueling for effort rather than ceremony. She had braided her hair back, which she rarely did, and she was wearing her school robes without the school badge, which technically every champion had been asked not to wear while competing. She looked. Harry searched for the word ready in the specific way that meant something had been settled in her, and she was operating from the settled place. Ron was at the end of the table. He hadn't spoken to Harry in 4 days. He'd barely spoken to Hermione, which was unusual enough to have its own particular texture. Harry looked at him once and found Ron looking back, and the look between them had the specific quality of things unsaid becoming heavy enough to have their own gravity. Later Harry thought, after Harry, Hermione said. He looked at her. "Whatever happens out there, you know what you're doing." She held his gaze for a moment. "Don't second guess in the middle of it, decide before, adapt after, but in the moment trust what you practiced." "That's good advice. It's basic applied psychology," she said, "but yes." She picked up her glass, then set it down. "You're going to be brilliant." It was the most she'd said about it, and she said it quickly, and then she looked back at her parchment as if she hadn't said it. He smiled and finished his breakfast and thought, right then. The crowd was already filling the stadium when they walked out into the cold morning air, and Harry Potter, champion of Hogwarts, walked toward it with his head up and his wand in his hand and the oldest castle in Britain at his back. Chapter 3, Dragon Fire. The champion's tent smelled of canvas and damp earth, and something sharper underneath. Nerves, Harry thought, though he knew that wasn't something you could actually smell. Bagman was inside when they arrived, bouncing on his heels with the restless energy of a man who would very much rather be commentating than organizing, a small sack in his hand that he held out toward them with the theatrical enthusiasm of someone who has been waiting to do this specific thing. "Ladies first," he said to Hermione, with a grin that suggested he found his own courtesy charming. Hermione reached into the bag and withdrew a small model dragon, a perfect miniature Chinese fireball, brilliant red, coiling around a tiny golden egg in its clawed feet. The number 2 was stamped on its belly. She examined it with the clinical attention of someone confirming information they already possessed. "Second," she said, and stepped back. Fleur drew next. Welsh green, number 1, then Cedric, Swedish short snout, number 3. Crumb pulled the Chinese fireball 4, and looked briefly at Hermione's identical miniature with an expression that crossed into something that might have been competitive respect if you caught it at exactly the right angle. Harry was last, which meant the sack came to him with one model left inside. He reached in and closed his hand around something warm. He already knew what it was. He drew it out anyway, the black and bronze Hungarian horntail, tiny and perfect, looking up at him with yellow pin eyes, a spike of its miniature tail pricking his thumb. Number 5, last to compete, which meant sitting here and listening to 4 other champions go first. He closed his hand around it. "Excellent," Bagman said. "So you've met your dragons. The aim is simple. Each of you must collect the golden egg from the nest. The egg is key to the second task. You'll understand when you open it." He paused. "Any questions? If the dragon leaves its nest voluntarily, does it count as completing the task?" Hermione asked. Bagman blinked. Well, that is, the task is to collect the egg. How you manage the dragon in that process is up to us," she finished. "Yes, thank you." Bagman looked briefly like he'd expected a different kind of question. Outside, the crowd noise was building in the particular way that crowds build before something starts, not yet at the roar it would become, but gaining depth, gaining weight, somewhere between anticipation and appetite. Harry could hear the wind picking up and the distant creak of stadium seating being filled faster than the ushering charms could manage, and somewhere further off, a sound that was not the crowd and not the wind. A dragon calling, one of them out there in the arena, just once. Just to confirm it was there. The tent held a specific quality of silence after that. Fleur was smoothing her robes with the precise hands of someone managing themselves carefully. Cedric was bouncing his wand between 2 fingers, a nervous habit Harry recognized because it was close to one of his own. Crumb stood perfectly still, looking at nothing, his brow its usual heavy wall, his focus already somewhere ahead. Hermione was writing. Harry looked at her. She was sitting on one of the canvas folding chairs with a small piece of parchment on her knee, writing something in her tight, quick script, filling the page with the particular density of someone who thinks faster than she writes. Her miniature fireball dragon was sitting on the arm of the chair beside her, and it had apparently taken offense at being ignored because it was now trying to climb her sleeve, which she was permitting without acknowledging. Harry sat down beside her. Notes. Last thoughts, she said. Things I want to remember for during a dragon encounter. You're going to remember a list. I'll remember having made it. That's different. She didn't look up. Don't smirk. I wasn't smirking. You were about to. He wasn't going to argue with that. He leaned back and looked at the canvas ceiling and worked through his own version of her list, not written but felt, the approach angle, the summoning arc. The speed he needed at altitude to stay ahead of a Hauntel's fire, which could reach 30 feet and track a moving target for up to 8 seconds. He knew these numbers. He had practiced these numbers until they lived in his hands rather than his head. He was ready. The crowd erupted above them, which meant Fleur had entered the arena. Harry closed his eyes and listened without watching what he couldn't see anyway. The crowd did its work, surging, dropping, a collective inhale that meant something dramatic, then applause of the sustained rolling kind that meant the task was complete. 11 minutes, give or take. Bagman came back into the tent with the energy of a man who has just been reminded how much he loves his job. Scores for Miss Delacour. He held up the parchment. 87877, 37 points. Excellent, very well done. He seemed genuinely pleased. Mr. Diggory, you're up. Cedric took a breath, rolled his shoulders and walked out with the specific grace of someone who was frightened and had decided to be graceful about it anyway. Harry watched him go and thought, good luck, Diggory. The Welsh green in the arena was noisier than the Hauntel had been, more complaints, more movement, the crowd reacting to something dramatic early in the task, and then going very quiet in a way that meant concentration was required, and then building again in the long rolling applause of a completed thing. Harry didn't know the exact time, but it felt close to Fleur's. Scores for Cedric, 98988, 42 points. Miss Granger, Bagman said. Hermione stood. She folded her parchment precisely in half and put it in her pocket. The miniature fireball dragon had made it to her shoulder and was sitting there like a very small red parrot. She picked it up with 2 fingers, set it on the chair and walked to the tent entrance. She stopped there just for a moment at the threshold. She didn't look back at Harry, she didn't need to. She just stood there for one breath, straightening her shoulders with the minute adjustment of someone settling something into place inside themselves. And then she walked out into the noise and the cold and the arena, and the tent flap swung closed behind her. Harry stood up. He couldn't sit. He walked to the tent entrance and pulled the flap back just enough to see, not the arena itself, not at this angle, but the crowd on the nearest bank of seats, and from the crowd's face you could read what was happening in the arena with accuracy enough to follow the story. The crowd saw her enter. The noise shifted, not quiet exactly, but a specific kind of collective adjustment, the audience revising their expectations, the particular murmur of 60,000 people thinking, she's 4th year, she's 14, then something happened in the arena and the crowd went absolutely silent. Not the silence of shock, the silence of attention, the silence of 60,000 people watching something they did not expect and could not look away from. Harry pulled the tent flap further back. He couldn't see the arena floor clearly, wrong angle, the canvas of the tent too much in the way, but he caught fragments. A flash of light, not red, not the orange of fire, a pulse, blue-white, a wide circular pulse that pushed outward like a stone dropped in water. Then noise, not the dragon, well, the dragon too, but under it, through it, the crowd catching its breath as a single creature. The fireball was moving. He could hear it, the heavy shift of something massive, the crack of a tail hitting earth, a sound that was halfway between a hiss and a roar and was clearly not a happy sound. Then silence again, different this time, the silence of something paused. Then Hermione's voice, clear and carrying even over the crowd's held breath, Accio. The crowd erupted, not the rolling applause of completion. The eruption of 60,000 people seeing something simultaneously, the kind of noise that happens when a crowd and a moment arrive at the same place at the same time. Harry let go of the tent flap and felt his own chest do something that wasn't quite pride and wasn't quite awe, but was in the vicinity of both. The noise continued. It changed texture, wonder becoming sustained, sustained becoming the rhythmic stamping that crowds do when they want to say something but the only language available is their feet. Someone was chanting something Harry couldn't make out through the canvas. He went back to his chair. He sat down. When Hermione came back into the tent 4 minutes later, she was slightly flushed and her braid had come loose on one side and she was carrying the golden egg under her arm like it was a library book. She sat down in the chair next to Harry. She put the egg on her knee. She breathed. How'd it go? Harry said. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has been through something intense and hasn't yet finished processing it. The pulse worked, she said. First application, it went for the eyes immediately. They all do. Apparently the vision is so critical to them that any threat to it overrides everything else. It turned its back to protect its eyes and I walked to the nest. You walked. It seemed like the most efficient approach once it had turned. She looked at the egg. I did have to transfigure stone into something to distract it while I took the egg. It was very aware of its nest, very protective. She was quiet for a second. "They're extraordinary creatures," she said in a different tone. "Even the fireball, it's terrifying, but it's also just an animal doing exactly what an animal does. It wasn't malicious, it was just itself." She looked up. "Scores haven't come out yet." Bagman appeared in the tent entrance, beaming. "Miss Granger, excellent work. Are you all right?" "Madame Pomfrey is—" "I'm fine," she said. "Scores." Bagman held up the parchment with the expression of a man about to reveal something he finds wonderful. 10-9, 10-9, 9, 47 points, highest score of the day. She looked at the parchment. Then she looked at the egg on her knee. Something moved across her face, not vanity, not even satisfaction exactly, more like the private acknowledgement of a thing proved true. She nodded once, the way she often nodded when a calculation confirmed itself. "Good," she said. Harry grinned. He couldn't help it. "Don't," she said. "I'm not doing anything. You're about to say something." "I was going to say 47 is very good." "It is." She looked at him. "It's also not 50. I lost a point on composure from Judge Karkaroff, which is politically motivated, and I dropped a point from Crouch for approach proximity to the dragon, which is technically valid but also, Hermione, 47 points. She stopped. She almost smiled. "Yes, all right." She looked at the egg again. "Go out there and beat it." "Wasn't planning on anything else," he said. "Mr. Crumb," Bagman called, "you're fourth." Crumb's approach was direct and efficient in the way that everything about Crumb was direct and efficient. The conjunctivitis curse hit the fireball from 60 feet out, and the crowd loved the spectacle of it, but what Harry heard from inside the tent was the story of a man who had done exactly what he planned to do, and it had worked. 14 minutes. The crowd sustained through it, enthusiastic but not transporting. Scores for Crumb: 8, 8, 8, 7, 8, 39 points. The Chinese fireball had caught his own eggs in the confusion and crushed 3 of them, which cost him dearly. "And our final champion," Bagman said with the showmanship of someone who has been waiting for this moment, "Mr. Harry Potter." Harry stood up. He felt the thing settle in him, the feeling he always got when he stepped onto a Quidditch pitch, when the crowd and the sky and the broom came into alignment and the rest of the world went quiet. Not calm exactly, more like clear. Everything unnecessary fell away, and what was left was just the task. He walked out. The noise of 60,000 people landing on you all at once was something you never quite got used to, regardless of Quidditch seasons. The arena was a huge natural depression in the castle grounds that had been widened and banked for the tournament, the spectator seating rising steeply on all sides. The arena floor below it a churned expanse of earth and claw marks and the evidence of 4 preceding encounters, stone cracked and blackened, the smell of sulphur still present in the cold air, a deep furrow cut across the center that was probably the Welsh green's tail. And at the far end of the arena, chained loosely, insultingly loosely, a Hungarian horntail. It saw him the moment he cleared the entry gate. He saw it see him. There was a specific quality of attention in a predator's gaze, something that arrived before the animal moved, a kind of locking on that you felt before you saw it. The horntail's yellow eyes found him across the length of the arena, and it lifted its head with the slow deliberateness of something that is not hurrying because it doesn't need to. Harry's hand was already on his wand, a Accio firebolt. He'd cast it an hour ago, summoning his broom from the dormitory, sending it to wait at the edge of the stadium. He'd thought about it carefully. He had no intention of standing on the arena floor when a horntail decided to charge. The firebolt came over the stadium wall at speed, over the heads of the spectators on the north side, and Harry took 3 running steps toward it and caught the handle at full stretch and was in the air before the horntail had fully registered what was happening. The crowd made a sound he'd never heard from a crowd before. He climbed fast, straight up, the firebolt opening up beneath him with the exhilarating obedience of a broom that understood urgency, and at 60 feet he leveled and looked down at the horntail. It was tracking him. Its head followed his flight with the terrible patience of a creature that had calculated arcs before he was born. It fired. The first burst of flame went left of him, which told him its tracking had a lag, a full-body creature using its neck to aim. There was a physical delay between decision and direction. He filed it and banked right, climbing further, and the second burst went exactly where he'd been. He was already gone. He circled the arena at altitude, watching. The crowd watched him watch the dragon and went very quiet. The horntail had gone still again, its enormous body settled back over the nest, its head weaving slowly as it tracked his flight. Its wingspan was extraordinary from up here, 22 feet if it was an inch, membrane dark as coal against the grey sky. The golden egg was visible under its chin, nested among its natural clutch, bronze and bright. He thought about the arc. 60 feet of descent at a steep approach angle, accounting for the egg's position relative to the dragon's body, accounting for the horntail's reaction speed to a fast-moving incoming object. He would have maybe 3 seconds from when the dragon registered his diving approach to when he needed the egg in his hand. He pointed his broom at the far end of the arena, away from the nest, and dived. The horntail's head swung to track him. Good, that was what he wanted, its attention on him, on his direction, and he pulled up hard at 30 feet and cut back left in a tight arc that used everything the firebolt had, the kind of turn that left your stomach somewhere behind you and came back at the nest from the near side at speed. Accio. He felt it, the spell connecting to the egg, the specific resistance of something heavy and magically charged, responding to a summoning charm from 50 feet at speed, and then the resistance releasing as the egg lifted. The Hauntel moved, not to intercept him, not to fire. It spun, the full mass of it rotating with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for something that size, and the tail came around like a weapon and hit the ground 3 feet from the nest, and the impact sent a physical shockwave through the arena floor, and Harry felt it through the air itself, a pressure wave that pushed his broom sideways. The egg was still coming. He adjusted for the sideways push, overcorrected, felt the broom buck under him, and then the egg arrived and his hand closed around it, and the impact of catching something that weighed roughly 12 pounds while traveling at speed, and at an angle sent him spinning for one terrible, exhilarating second before he righted himself and climbed. The crowd. Harry had heard crowds before. He had scored winning goals in Quidditch. He had won matches in rain and in darkness, and once technically while unconscious. But the noise that erupted from the stadium in that moment was something categorically different, 60,000 people losing their composure simultaneously, the sound of it hitting him like a physical thing, visceral and enormous and human. He came down slowly, circling, landing in the center of the arena with the golden egg under one arm and the firebolt in the other hand. He stood on the churned earth and the crowd was still going, still building. The stamping and shouting merged into something you felt more than heard. The Hauntel watched him from its end of the arena. He looked back at it. Neither of them moved for a moment. He gave it a small nod. He wasn't sure why. It felt right. He walked to the exit gate and the crowd followed him all the way out. In the tent, Hermione was on her feet before he came through the entrance. Looked at him, at the egg again, and something crossed her face that she quickly reorganized into something more composed. 47, she said. Beat it. He grinned. Let's see. Bagman was already there, parchment in hand, looking like a man who has witnessed the thing he was put on earth to witness. The other champions were watching, Crumb with his heavy, evaluating attention, Fleur with something that might have been reluctant appreciation, Cedric openly, warmly grinning. 10, Bagman announced. 10, 9, 10. He paused with the timing of a born showman. 9 and 10, 48. 1 point more than Hermione. He looked at her, she looked at him. There was a beat of silence between them that had several layers in it. Then she said, Karkaroff gave you 10. He gave me 9. He gave me 9 and you 9. The difference was Dumbledore's score. She looked at her notes. Dumbledore gave me 9. He gave you 10. She looked up. Interesting. It's 1 point, Hermione. It's a data point, she corrected. I'm not upset about it. She said it clearly and honestly, which meant she actually wasn't. You went last and you were spectacular. The broom approach was, yes, fine, it was spectacular. She said it the way she said things she decided to simply admit. The point is interesting for what it tells us about the judges, not for the relative score, which is that Dumbledore has a preference. She said it quietly, not accusatory, just noting a fact. Not that he doesn't think I'm capable, but there's something about you specifically that she started again. I think it's connected to whatever he already knows about the castle, about why we're here. Harry was quiet for a moment. Across the tent, Crumb was wrapping the Chinese fireball miniature in his scarf carefully, like he was going to keep it. Fleur was speaking to someone outside, her silver hair catching the cold afternoon light through the tent's open flap. Cedric was looking at his own golden egg with the expression of someone realizing that the tournament had become very real. What do you think is in the egg? Harry said. Hermione had been wondering this for exactly the time it had taken her to walk from the arena to the tent. He could tell because she had the look. It's a clue, she said, for the second task. Which means the second task is connected to something the egg represents. Eggs in classical magical symbolism represent, well, a number of things, but in the context of a tournament designed around old magic, she looked at her egg sitting on the chair beside her, golden and silent. I think we need to open them. Not here, Crumb said. They all looked at him. He was already standing to leave, the fireball miniature in his scarf in his pocket. He looked at Hermione specifically. Not here, these walls, he nodded toward the tent canvas, have ears. Bagman has ears. He looked at Harry, and someone else has ears. Someone in this tournament does not have good intentions. It was the most he'd said in any given conversation. He said it without drama, as a simple statement of a thing he'd observed and considered. Harry and Hermione exchanged a look. Tonight, Harry said, somewhere private. The 7th floor, Hermione said. There's a room, the come-and-go room, Crumb said with the slight accent of someone translating. We have something similar at Durmstrang, a space that answers to need. He looked at Harry. I know of it. Hermione looked at Crumb with a slightly recalibrated expression. How do you know about? Karkaroff showed me, he said simply. He wanted to use it for something I did not agree with. I declined. He pulled on his coat. Tonight then, he left the tent. The three of them watched him go. Right, Cedric said from behind them. He was leaning against the tent pole with his arms crossed and the expression of someone who has been listening to a developing situation and made a decision about it. I'd like to be included in tonight if that's all right. You heard all of that, Hermione said. Remarkably thin canvas, Cedric said pleasantly. She looked at him, then at Harry. The more the better, Harry said. Karkaroff already thinks there's a conspiracy against Crumb. The actual conspiracy, whatever it is, will be easier to see with more sets of eyes. The actual conspiracy, Fleur said. Harry turned. She was standing in the tent entrance, her silver hair windblown from whatever conversation she'd been having outside, and her expression was the sharp, focused look he'd seen on her face in the champions' meeting when she was paying more attention than she was appearing to. How long have you been standing there? Hermione asked. Long enough, Fleur said. She came fully inside and let the tent flap fall behind her. There are things happening in this tournament that are not correct. I have felt it since we arrived. Madame Maxime agrees with me, though she does not say so because she does not wish to make problems. She looked between Harry and Hermione with the directness of someone who has decided to be direct and intends to finish the job. I will come tonight as well. There was a brief moment where the five of them, Harry, Hermione, Cedric, Fleur, and the recently departed Crumb's chair, occupied the same space with the particular tension of a group that has just decided to be something more than competitors. Tonight, Harry said, 10 o'clock, 7th floor across from the tapestry of Barnabas the Balmy. Walk past 3 times thinking about needing a room with chairs and good light. And privacy, Hermione added. And no bagman, Cedric said. Especially no bagman, Harry agreed. He went to the feast that followed in the Great Hall where the entire school was already in the particular state of collective excitement that follows witnessing something extraordinary, and sat down and found that everything had shifted, not subtly, not in the gradual way things usually shifted at Hogwarts, in the blunt, undeniable way of something that has happened in public and cannot be unwitnessed. People he'd never spoken to came over to say things. Second years materialized with the specific reverent energy of people who have just watched something happen and need to be proximate to the person it happened to. Seamus knocked over his pumpkin juice trying to clap Harry on the back. Neville said, that was really something, Harry. In the quiet, genuine way Neville said things that he meant completely. Hermione sat across from Harry, and around her something similar was happening that she was managing with the particular combination of acknowledgement and redirection that she'd developed over years of being the smartest person in the room, and not being entirely sure what to do with that. Lavender said, Hermione, that was brilliant, which was 2 words that had never previously been arranged in that sequence and directed at Hermione by Lavender Brown, and Hermione blinked at her like someone processing unexpected input. Thank you, she said. How did you know to use the pulse version? Lavender pressed. Was that something you researched, or did you just researched? Hermione said. Of course, Parvati said. Obviously she researched. I didn't mean, no, I know you didn't, Hermione said, and she sounded surprised by herself slightly, the particular surprise of realizing that someone's question was genuine rather than rhetorical. Crumb actually pointed me toward the specific variant. We've been using the library at similar hours. Lavender and Parvati exchanged a look that communicated something in the frequency Harry couldn't quite decode. Ron was at the end of the table. Harry looked at him in the gap between Seamus talking and Dean interjecting. Ron was looking at his plate, not eating with particular enthusiasm, the specific non-eating of someone who is deliberately not looking at something they're thinking about constantly. Harry got up, took his plate, walked down the table and sat next to him. Ron looked up. His expression went through several states quickly. All right, he said finally. All right, Harry said. They were quiet for a moment. Around them, the feast continued, joyful and oblivious, and Harry ate a bread roll and waited. That was, Ron started. You don't have to. I want to. Ron pushed his food around. What you did today, what you both did, that was real. That wasn't luck. That wasn't just your name coming out of a goblet. He was talking to his plate more than to Harry, the way Ron talked about things he found difficult to say outright. I've been being a prat about this. A bit, Harry agreed. Ron looked up sharply, then saw Harry's expression and exhaled through his nose. A bit, he allowed. He paused. I thought for a second when your name came out and then Hermione's. He stopped again. Say it, Harry said. I thought you'd both planned it, found a way in. Ron said it quickly, like removing a plaster. Which was stupid because you didn't even know about the tournament until we arrived here, but I thought, he shook his head. I don't know what I thought. I was an idiot. Harry was quiet. I know, Ron said. I know I was, and then watching you face that thing, he shook his head again. I was scared for you the whole time, both of you. That's what friends do, Harry said. Yeah, Ron picked up his fork, finally actually eating. Yeah, it is. He looked down the table at Hermione, who was explaining something to Lavender with the focused patience of a person who has decided explaining is worth the effort. She was incredible, by the way. She was, Harry agreed. Don't tell her I said that. She'll know I know, and then she'll know I was an idiot and… Ron, what? She already knows. Ron looked pained. Right, yeah, he ate in silence for a moment. Are you going to tell me what's actually going on? The castle, the 5th name, why it chose you both? Harry looked at him. He thought about 10 o'clock and the room of requirement and the golden eggs that were sitting in their respective champions' possession, and the thing Crumb had said about bad intentions in the tournament, and the letter from Sirius still sitting in his trunk asking him to think about who benefits from all of this. Yeah, Harry said. Tonight, but not just us, there's a meeting. A meeting. The champions, all 5 plus you if you want to come. Ron sat up straighter. The particular quality of Ron straightening, the way he went from uncertain to genuinely interested, was something Harry had always found encouraging. 5 champions. It's a complicated tournament, Harry said. Right, said Ron, and finally ate a proper forkful of food for the first time in days. Right, tell me when. The room of requirement gave them what they needed without ceremony. A wide, low-lit space with comfortable chairs arranged in a rough circle, a fire going in a hearth that hadn't existed until they walked in, and the particular quality of quiet that meant the room had applied its own silencing to the walls. The golden egg sat in the center of the circle like a still life of something impending. All 5 champions. Ron in the corner where he'd installed himself as unofficial note-taker and lookout. 6 people in a firelit room that didn't officially exist, with 5 objects that contained the key to the next task, and as Hermione had already started to articulate when everyone was barely seated, potentially much more than that. The second task will involve water, she said. Historically, the Triwizard's middle task has always involved a natural body of water. Given Hogwarts' location, that's the lake. She looked at the eggs. I believe these tell us what the task is specifically. Which means we should open them. Together, Cedric said. It makes sense, we may need to cross-reference whatever's inside. Fleur reached forward and picked up her egg first. She looked at the catch on its side, ornate, golden, designed to be opened, and lifted the lid. The sound that came out was the sound of nothing that Harry had a name for. Started as music and became something else, something that occupied the space between music and language, rising and falling with the specific quality of a melody that was also a sentence. It filled the room, echoing off walls that were absorbing rather than reflecting it, and everyone in the room went still. Then it stopped because Fleur had closed it. It is a voice, she said, a singing voice, but I cannot understand the words. Underwater, Hermione said immediately. That's a mermish voice. Merfolk, if you listened to it underwater, the resonance would shift and the words would be intelligible. She was already making notes. The task is in the lake, something will be taken from us, the egg says an hour hence, and something we'll sorely miss. You understood it, Ron said. Parts, the tonality of mermish follows particular phonological patterns that if you know what to listen for. She stopped. Yes, I understood parts of it. She looked at her notes. Something taken, an hour, the lake. She looked up. We'll each have something taken from us, something we'd miss, and we have an hour to retrieve it from whatever depth the merfolk have placed it. The room held that for a moment. Something we'd sorely miss, Cedric said slowly. A person, Crumb said. Everyone looked at him. Not a thing, he said. The tournament is about courage and personal cost. The first task was a creature, something you could overcome with skill. The second task will be personal, something you cannot fight your way past. He looked at his hands. A person you care about. The fire crackled. Outside the room, outside the castle, the lake was cold and dark and deep, and somewhere in it, presumably, merfolk were already preparing. Then we need to survive underwater for an hour, Harry said. Breathing, movement, defense, gillyweed, Hermione said, writing. Or a bubblehead charm, though that's significantly more vulnerable. A transfiguration approach to gills is theoretically possible, but the margin for error is. She looked up and seemed to register that she was doing the thing again. I'm going to research this properly. We have until February. February, Fleur said. That is roughly 3 months, Hermione said, which is sufficient if we start now. She looked around the circle. There's something else we should talk about. The fire shifted. The room seemed to listen. Someone in this tournament is working towards something that has nothing to do with the tournament itself, she said. Harry's name came out of a goblet that someone tampered with. Mine came out of something older than that tampering, the castle itself responding to it. Whatever plan exists to use Harry as a piece in something, and I believe there is a plan, and I believe it ends at the third task, is not designed for 5 champions. It is designed for one outcome. She met Harry's eyes. And we are going to make sure that outcome doesn't happen. By winning, Harry said. By winning, she confirmed. All of us, together where we can, independently where we must, but with full awareness that someone wants this tournament to end a specific way and we are going to be the reason it doesn't. Crumb nodded, once, the minimal nod. Fleur looked at Hermione for a long moment. I came here thinking you were a child playing at a grown competition, she said, without any attempt to soften it. I was wrong. She said it with the directness of someone who has decided that being honest about being wrong is more important than protecting themselves from having been wrong. Hermione received this with equanimity. I know, she said. Most people do. She looked at her notes. I'll have research on underwater survival by end of week. We should meet again here in a fortnight. Compare what we've found. She picked up her golden egg and turned it in her hands, firelight on gold, the mermish voice sealed inside it waiting to be heard in a different element entirely. Outside, the castle was settling into its night sounds, the groans and sighs of 8 centuries of stone cooling, the particular vocabulary of a building that is, in the smallest and most ancient ways, awake. Harry sat in the firelit room and looked at the 5 golden eggs, and the 5 people who'd earned them, and thought about the lake and the cold and the thing that would be taken from him. He thought he knew what they'd take. He looked at Hermione across the circle of chairs, writing in her notebook with the focused intensity of someone already 3 steps into the problem, her braids still half loose from the arena, the firelight doing what firelight does to people when they're not paying attention to being observed. He looked away. The castle around them said nothing, but the fire was warm. Chapter 4. The lake's bargain. December arrived at Hogwarts the way it always did, not gradually but all at once, as though the castle had made a decision overnight. The grounds went white. The lake went the color of pewter under sky that hadn't been blue in a week. The corridors acquired the particular smell of wet wool and warming charms that meant students had come in from outside and forgotten to dry themselves properly, and the staircases began their seasonal behavior of depositing people on wrong floors, which Hermione had started to suspect was deliberate temperature management, the castle routing foot traffic to generate warmth in underused corridors. She mentioned this to Harry on a Tuesday, and he said probably, with the equanimity of someone who had long since accepted the castle's eccentricities as fact. They were in the library, which they were most evenings now, with a consistency that had become its own kind of routine, not studying for classes or not only for classes, but working through the problem of the second task with the organized efficiency of people who had established that 3 months was sufficient time if you didn't waste it. The table they'd claimed in the back corner, near the restricted section, had acquired a kind of institutional permanence. Madame Pince had stopped asking them what they were looking for, and had begun simply leaving relevant volumes at the edge of their workspace without comment, which was its own form of endorsement. The research was going well, which was to say it was going the way research always went when Hermione was driving it, quickly, thoroughly, and with occasional violent divergences into tangential knowledge that turned out not to be tangential at all. Gillyweed, she said, for approximately the 14th time in 10 days, though each iteration came loaded with new information. She was cross-referencing 2 books and a handwritten pamphlet that she'd found tucked inside a copy of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, the kind of resource that only appeared if you knew what you were looking for. Native to the Mediterranean. Restricted import under the Magical Creatures Act of 1964, but Hogwarts maintains a stock in the greenhouses for herbology purposes, which means Professor Sprout has access to it. She made a note. The transformation is complete in under a minute. Gills, webbed hands and feet, significantly enhanced lung capacity. Effective for exactly 1 hour in cold water, slightly longer in warm, slightly shorter in cold. The lake in February, Harry said. Cold, very cold, which means we're looking at 50 minutes of effective transformation, not 60. We need to account for that. She underlined something. The alternative is the bubblehead charm. Fleur's going with that, I think, based on what she said at the last meeting. It's technically less limiting but more vulnerable to counter magic. If something down there disrupts the charm, Gillyweed, Harry said. I agree, for you at least. I'm still deciding. She pulled the pamphlet toward her. The interesting thing about Gillyweed is the experience of it. The accounts I've found describe it as disorienting initially. The physical change is rapid and it requires a moment to adjust. You'd be useless for the first 30 to 60 seconds, so enter the water before consuming it. That would minimize disorientation but maximize exposure time in cold water before the transformation. There's a calculation involved. She was writing already, the quick, dense script that filled margins. I'll work out the optimal timing. Harry was doing his own reading, a history of Hogwarts lake fauna that was less useful for task preparation and more useful for general situational awareness. He'd found 3 references to the merfolk colony in the lake's deeper sections, a note about the grindylows in the shallows, and a passage about something called he checked the page, a giant squid that was described as benign if unprovoked, though the definition of provocation has historically been interpreted broadly by the creature itself. He set that one aside. Crumb came in at 8, found his usual chair, opened his usual book. He developed the habit of pausing at their table on his way past, not stopping, not sitting, just a brief acknowledgement, the way he acknowledged most things, minimally, sincerely, without performance. Tonight he set a small piece of paper on the table as he passed. Harry picked it up. On it, in angular Eastern European handwriting, bubblehead charm fails below 40 feet against Murmish dissonance magic. Historical record, 1792 tournament. Karkaroff does not know I have this. Hermione read it over his shoulder. She looked at Crumb's back. He was already settled in his chair, already reading, the paper having been delivered and its existence apparently complete. He's been going through Karkaroff's private records, she said quietly. Apparently. I'm not going to ask how. Probably better not to. She took the paper, added it to her research notes with the careful organization of someone who has a system and intends to maintain it, and wrote bubblehead charm confirm vulnerability on her task list. Then she looked at the spot where Crumb was sitting and said quietly enough that it wouldn't carry, he's a good person. Yeah, Harry agreed. I didn't expect that. She said it honestly. The famous, taciturn international Quidditch star who barely speaks to anyone. I expected, I don't know, less. People are generally more than they appear, Harry said, with the mild philosophy of someone who had spent several years being consistently underestimated and had developed opinions about the practice. Hermione looked at him over the book she'd just picked up. Something in the look had a quality to it that wasn't quite what he expected, something that arrived and then was quickly organized into a more standard expression. Yes, she said, they generally are. The Yule Ball announcement changed the texture of the castle the way seasonal events always did, not the castle itself, which maintained its usual vast equanimity, but the students in it, who suddenly had an agenda that ran parallel to all existing agendas and required immediate attention. The fourth-year girls' dormitory apparently hosted a strategy meeting within 30 minutes of McGonagall's announcement, the details of which filtered down through various channels in a distorted form that suggested several contradictory things about who had asked whom. Harry became aware of the Yule Ball as a personal logistical problem on the Wednesday of the announcement week, when he was trying to read in the common room and found it difficult because the common room had become a live site of ongoing social negotiation. People were being asked, some were asking. There were rejections occurring with varying degrees of dignity and several acceptances occurring with more volume than strictly necessary. He needed a date. He was required as a champion to open the dancing, which meant he was required to have a partner, which meant he needed to ask someone, which meant he needed to think about who and how and whether he had any idea how to do it. He thought about this for about 4 minutes in the common room and then went to find Hermione because thinking about things near Hermione was generally more productive than thinking about them alone. She was in the library. She looked up when he sat down with the expression of someone who had been absorbed in something and was deciding whether to resurface from it. "I need to ask someone to the ball," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Something moved across her face and organized itself into something neutral. "Yes," she said, "you do. I'm not very good at this." "No," she agreed, which was not strictly helpful but was honest. "Have you considered who you'd like to ask?" He hadn't specifically. He'd been thinking about it in the abstract, the logistical shape of it, without populating it with an actual person, which was probably the problem. He thought about it now. He thought about the obvious candidates, Cho Chang, who was beautiful and seemed kind and who had smiled at him once in a way that had stayed with him. And then he thought about something else, something closer, something that he kept thinking toward and then backing away from because it was the kind of thought that once acknowledged changed the shape of several other things. "What about you?" he said. Hermione looked at him. "I mean," he said, and the sentence was not finishing itself with any of the speed or clarity he'd have preferred. "We're both champions. We're required to open the dancing. It makes sense to..." He stopped. "That wasn't right either. That was worse, actually. I'm not saying it only makes sense. I mean, Harry," she said. "Yeah, are you asking me to the ball?" He looked at her. She was holding her quill and looking at him with the specific attention she gave things she was taking seriously, and her expression had the particular quality of someone who was waiting for him to say something accurately rather than approximately. "Yes," he said, "I am." She was quiet for a moment. Outside the library windows the December dark had settled fully and the library's enchanted candles were doing their warm work, and somewhere in the castle a clock was striking 9. "Okay," she said. "Okay, yes, okay." She picked up her quill again. "I was going to have to go with someone regardless since I'm also required to open the dancing," and she stopped, looked at her parchment. "And I'd like to go with you," she finished more quietly with the quality of someone finishing a sentence they'd been deciding whether to complete. "So yes." Harry sat with that for a moment. The library was very quiet. "Good," he said. "Good," she agreed. They worked in companionable silence for another hour, and if the silence had a slightly different texture than it usually did, warmer, maybe, or more aware of itself, neither of them mentioned it. The ball was on Christmas Eve, which meant the 2 weeks preceding it were occupied by a strange doubling of purpose. The research and preparation for the second task continued with unbroken focus, while around it the castle performed its annual transformation into something that looked like Christmas had been asked to express itself in architectural terms and had not held back. Hagrid dragged in the Christmas trees. The suits of armor were taught to sing carols, which they performed with sincerity but not always accuracy. Professor Flitwick waved his wand at every available surface and left trailing lights in his wake. The great hall grew magnificent. Harry borrowed a set of dress robes from a third-year Gryffindor whose older brother had outgrown them, deep green, well-made, significantly better than what he'd had access to previously. He mentioned this to Hermione in passing, and she nodded the nod of someone who had already taken care of her own arrangements without requiring an audience. On the evening of the ball, Harry waited at the bottom of the main staircase with the other male champions, Krum in deep red Durmstrang robes that suited him in the specific way that clothes suit people who don't think about clothes, Cedric in silver grey that matched his general aesthetic of being pleasant to look at and knowing it without making a thing of it. Bagman was hovering at the edge of things, which was his natural habitat. Various judges and ministry officials were already inside. Fleur came down first, which was somewhat expected since Fleur's presence in any room was the kind of thing that reorganized the room's attention without trying. She was wearing blue-silver robes that managed to look like both formal wear and a natural extension of her, and she came down with the self-possession of someone who has stopped paying attention to the effect she has on people because it has always been there and is not the most interesting thing about her. Cedric offered his arm. She took it with the graciousness of someone who had expected something and was pleased to find the expectation met. Krum was looking up the staircase with an expression that Harry had never seen on his face before, not the heavy assessment, not the evaluating quiet, something that had softened and simplified in a way that suggested the person who appeared at the top of the staircase mattered to him in a way that was not about the tournament. Hermione came down the stairs. She'd done something to her hair, not entirely tamed, nothing would entirely tame it, but it had been swept back and up into something that kept it out of her face and let you see the whole shape of her features without the usual distraction. And her robes were a deep blue that was almost navy, well-fitted, and she was walking down the stairs with the specific quality of someone who has simply decided to be where they are without apology or calculation, and Harry thought, of course. Of course, because it was Hermione, and Hermione was always more than whatever the immediate situation suggested, and he had known her for 4 years, and somehow this was still the moment where that became completely, unavoidably obvious. She reached the bottom of the stairs. She looked at him. "You look nice," she said. "You look," he stopped. The word he'd been about to use was not the word he wanted because it wasn't sufficient. "Really good," he said. She almost rolled her eyes but didn't quite, which he thought meant she'd registered something in the delivery that made the inadequate vocabulary less annoying. "Ready?" "Yeah," he offered his arm. She took it. They walked toward the great hall with the other champions, and Harry felt the eyes that followed them, felt the wave of reaction from the assembled students, and it landed differently than usual attention landed, not uncomfortable, just present. Crumb was beside Hermione for a moment during the procession, and Harry caught the look Crumb gave her, straightforward, warm and complicated in a way that Harry acknowledged without doing anything about because this was not the time. Hermione caught it too and said something to Crumb in a low voice that made him nod once and look forward. The doors to the great hall opened. The room had transformed. Ice sculptures, candles in their hundreds, tables garlanded and glittering, the enchanted ceiling showing a deep winter sky through snow that fell and disappeared before it reached the floor. The Weird Sisters were already set up on their stage at the far end, and the professors were at the staff table looking collectively like people who had dressed for formality and were managing their enthusiasm for dancing with varying success. McGonagall called the champions to the dance floor. Harry and Hermione walked to the center and faced each other, and the Weird Sisters struck up something slow and stately because it was the opening dance and required a tempo that accommodated people who didn't know what they were doing. Harry knew what he was doing, which was a surprise to him. He'd practiced once in the common room with Ron holding one arm out sideways and making sarcastic suggestions, and it had not been a productive session. But now, with his hand at Hermione's waist and her hand in his and the music giving them something to move to, it was fine. It was better than fine. It was easy in the way that things are easy when you know the person you're doing them with. "You can actually dance," she said, sounding genuinely surprised. "Mildly," he said, "more than mildly. Don't tell anyone, it'll ruin the mystique." She did laugh then, properly, the laugh she reserved for things that struck her as genuinely funny rather than socially appropriate, and they went around the floor with the other champions, and Harry thought, "This is good," and held on to the fact of it without pulling on it. The other students joined after the first song. The formal opening gave way to the actual party, and the Weird Sisters shifted their tempo upward, and the great hall became what it was supposed to be, noisy and warm and full of people choosing, for one evening, to simply be where they were. They danced for 2 songs and then stepped off the floor because 2 songs was sufficient, and there was food, and Harry was hungry in the particular efficient way of someone who had been running on toast and library hours for 2 weeks. They found a table near the ice sculptures, which were cooler but quieter, and Hermione immediately produced a small piece of parchment from somewhere that had no obvious pockets and said, I know, preemptively before he'd said anything. "I wasn't going to say anything," he said. "You were going to make a face." "I don't make faces." "Harry," she set the parchment on the table. "This occurred to me during the first dance, about the underwater approach, Hermione. It's important, it's Christmas Eve. The task is in February, and February is in February." He took the parchment gently from her hand and folded it and gave it back to her. "Write it down so you don't lose it and then put it away one night." She looked at the folded parchment, then at him. "One night," she said, "and put it away." She picked up her juice, he picked up his. The ice sculpture nearest them was a dragon, someone's idea of thematic humor, and it caught the candlelight in its frozen surface and threw it around in cold fragments. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Obviously, when you think about what they'll take from you for the second task, what is it?" He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "The egg said what you'll sorely miss. Crumb thinks it's a person. I think he's right." She was looking at the ice dragon, not at him. "I've been thinking about it. Whoever they take," she paused. "For me it would be you, the person I'd sorely miss." She said it quickly and clearly, in the way she said things she decided to say rather than sit on. "I wanted you to know that, in case it becomes relevant during the task." Harry was quiet for a moment. "Same," he said. She looked at him then. "You're the person I'd sorely miss," he said. "I've been thinking about it for 2 weeks." The ice sculpture caught the candlelight again. The Weird Sisters were playing something slower now, the hall shifting gear. At a nearby table, Ron was talking to someone and glancing over periodically in the way he did when he was pretending not to monitor a situation he was absolutely monitoring. "So they'll probably take each of us," Hermione said, which was her way of moving forward from something significant by acknowledging it and incorporating it rather than dwelling. "We'll be the hostages for each other. Which means we're in the lake at the same time trying to retrieve each other." That's, Harry thought about it, that's actually an advantage. We know the other person is there, we know where to go. We know each other's strengths and likely approaches. She stopped. "We should talk about this later." One night, he reminded her, one night. She looked at the table. You're good for me, you know, I know you tell me frequently. I tell you because it keeps happening. But she was almost smiling again, the small precise smile that appeared when she was pleased about something she'd decided not to be demonstrative about. I'm good for you too, she said, not asking. You're the reason I passed third year, he said. I'm the reason you passed every year. That's also probably true. It's definitely true. She looked at him sidelong. Don't look so cheerful about it. You'd be completely capable without me. You just prefer to have me around. Yeah, he said simply, I do. And there it was again, that quality in the air between them, like something settling, like a very old thing coming to rest in the place it was meant to occupy. The fire was warm and the ice sculpture was cold and the music was playing, and Hermione looked at her hands on the table and Harry looked at the ice dragon, and neither of them said anything else for a while, but it wasn't quiet so much as full. The next 2 weeks passed with the particular speed of December becoming January, the castle emptying for Christmas, most students leaving, Harry and Hermione staying because the library didn't close and the lake didn't move and the research had a momentum that Christmas didn't interrupt. They were not the only ones. Krum stayed, working in the library with his customary quiet. Cedric stayed, which surprised Harry, and when he asked, Cedric shrugged and said, there's a family thing I'm avoiding, with the expression of someone who has made peace with a decision. The 5 days between Christmas and New Year's were the quietest Harry had known at Hogwarts, the castle stripped of its usual population, the great hall serving food to a handful of students at long tables that felt enormous by contrast, the corridors empty in the specific way that made their usual crowding almost dreamlike by comparison. It was in those 5 days that the castle started doing something new. It was subtle at first. A staircase that rerouted them toward the library they'd already been going to. A door that opened unprompted into a practice space they needed. The room of requirement making itself available before they'd completed the traditional 3 passes, as if it had learned their intention from their stride. It's helping us, Harry said one morning, standing in a corridor that had deposited them at the herbology greenhouses when they'd been going to the potions classroom. It's been helping us since October, Hermione said, looking at the greenhouse door with the considering expression of someone checking a theory. The routing is getting more direct. She pushed the greenhouse door open. Professor Sprout was inside, winterproofing the beds, and she looked up and said, oh, good morning, I've just been about to come find someone too, and stopped, looking at them with the particular expression of someone who has been surprised by the answer arriving before they finished forming the question. We were coming to ask about gillyweed, Hermione said. Sprout looked at them for a moment. Then she looked at the greenhouse ceiling in the vague upward direction of the castle. Right, she said in the tone of someone who has worked at Hogwarts long enough to stop being surprised by this sort of thing. How much do you need? January passed in a productive blur. They researched, they practiced. They met with the other champions in the room of requirement every 2 weeks with increasing efficiency. Fleur had abandoned the bubblehead charm after Krum's note, and was now researching an alternative water-breathing approach involving a transfiguration of her own that she described in broad strokes and protected in specifics, which was entirely fair. Cedric had quietly developed something impressive with a summoning variant Harry hadn't considered. Krum had Krum's approach, which was direct, physical, and would probably work through sheer force of will if nothing else. Harry and Hermione had gillyweed. They also had, after considerable research and 3 visits to Professor Flitwick who answered their hypotheticals without asking why they were hypothetical, a very clear picture of what the task was going to involve, and a set of prepared responses to every scenario Hermione had been able to construct. This was, Harry had learned, the specific value of preparing with Hermione. She didn't prepare for the likely scenarios. She prepared for everything, and then she prepared for the scenarios she'd missed, and then she made Harry demonstrate that he'd internalized all of it so it wouldn't vanish from his brain under pressure. What do you do if the Grindylows get between you and the Merfolk village before you reach it? Asked on a Tuesday afternoon, cross-legged on the floor of the room of requirement with her notes spread around her. Flypendo, Harry said. From as far back as they let me, they swarm in numbers so you want distance. And if your visibility drops below 5 feet, Lumos solemn, more penetration than standard Lumos in murky water. And if you're running short on time, 10 minutes left, you haven't found the hostages yet. Akia, whatever they're being held with, Harry said. The hostage won't respond to a summoning charm, but whatever's securing them might. Hermione nodded, making a mark. And if I'm secured with something that doesn't respond to a summoning charm, then I find you and do it manually, Harry said. I'm not a priority over your own time. You're the person I sorely miss, he said flatly. So yes, you are, she looked at him. That's emotionally reasonable, but tactically, Hermione. If you're down there and you're restrained and I've got the capacity to free you, I'm going to free you. He held her gaze. And you would do the same for me. That's not a discussion. She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then I would, she said quietly. Yes, so that's the plan. That's part of the plan. She looked at her notes. The rest of it is making sure we're both fast enough that it doesn't become necessary. Agreed. In the evenings, they walked sometimes to Hagrid's, sometimes along the lakeshore in the cold, sometimes just through the castle's evening corridors because the castle was interesting at evening in a way that rewarded paying attention. Harry had started to feel the castle the way you feel a room you know very well, not consciously, but as a kind of background awareness, a sense of whether something was where it should be. One evening, coming back from the lakeshore in a wind that had real conviction to it, Hermione said, "I found something in the Founder's records, about the castle, about the goblet, the original version before the tournament modification." She pulled her scarf up against the wind. It was called the Selector's Flame. The Founders used it to identify students who would, the exact phrase is, carry the work forward in times of need. When the school faced a serious threat, the Selector's Flame was supposed to respond, choose the people who could address it. She glanced at him. It was last used in 1612. What happened in 1612? Goblin Rebellion. Hogwarts was at the center of it. There were people within the ministry trying to use Hogwarts itself as a bargaining chip. The Flame chose 3 students and an aura in training, and according to the record they were, she paused, decisive. Harry thought about that. The Flame was then modified into the goblet for the tournament. Around 1750, yes, the modification was supposed to suppress the original function, make it purely competitive, but the castle's intent, she stopped, working out how to say it. I think the original enchantment never fully went away, and I think something woke it up this year. Voldemort, Harry said. Someone moving to restore Voldemort, she said carefully. Which the castle, the Selector's Flame, recognized as the kind of threat it was designed to respond to. She turned up the path toward the castle doors. It chose us, Harry, not because we're the most powerful students in the school, though I'd argue we're competitive for that title. It chose us because the original enchantment was designed to choose people who would respond to the threat, who would do something rather than be swept along by it. Harry walked beside her. The castle rose ahead of them against the January sky, its windows warm, its towers patient. And someone in the tournament is part of that threat, he said. Yes, and they didn't expect the flame to reactivate. They expected an ordinary goblet that had been tampered to produce one name. She pushed open the castle door and the warmth hit them, the smell of stone and old wood and decades of meals and fires. 2 names broke their plan. They've been adapting ever since. Moody, Harry said. She looked at him sharply. He'd been sitting with this for weeks, the accumulating discomfort of it, the pieces that didn't quite fit. He's been watching us differently than the other professors, Harry said. Not the way he watches other students, more specific than that, like he's tracking something. He's the defense against the dark arts professor, she said. Watching students is, he watches us the way Sirius described Voldemort's people watching me in 2nd year, Harry said. Like a piece of a plan. Hermione was quiet for a long moment. They were inside now, the castle warm around them, the corridor leading to the staircases. I think you're right, she said. I've thought so since the first task. The way he asked me just once casually how I found out about the dragons. She looked at Harry, which would only matter to someone who had a specific plan for the first task that I disrupted by being there and performing well. So what do? We keep doing what we're doing, she said. We prepare, we win, we stay visible and capable and very difficult to manipulate. She looked up at the staircase as it swung toward them. And we stay close. Close, Harry said. Together, she clarified. We watch each other's backs. We already do that. More formally, she said. More deliberately, whatever is coming. She looked at him. I don't want to be caught off guard by any of it. She meant the tournament. He was fairly sure she meant the tournament. He also thought she might have meant something else, something that existed in the space between the things they'd said at the ball and the things they hadn't said since, the warm, careful space that had opened up between them and was being treated by mutual unspoken agreement with the respect of something fragile and significant. I'm not going anywhere, he said. Good, she said. She moved to the staircase. Come on. I need you to practice the Grindylow scenario one more time. It's 10 at night. The lake is cold in February at any time of day or night. Grindylows have no concept of appropriate hours. He followed her up the staircase. The castle moved it smoothly, efficiently, delivering them to exactly the floor they needed without any of its usual scenic detours. Harry looked at the ceiling briefly, at the vaulted stone above him. Thanks, he said quietly. The torch nearest him brightened just slightly, just for a second. The morning of February the 24th was grey and absolutely freezing, the kind of cold that had substance to it that you met rather than merely experienced. Harry and Hermione ate breakfast quickly and practically. The other champions filtered in, Fleur composed, Cedric with the specific focus of someone who has prepared thoroughly and is now ready to be finished preparing. Crumb last, sitting briefly at the Durmstrang table and then not sitting there anymore, standing in the way he often did when stillness became unavailable to him. Ron arrived with the particular energy of a person who has been appointed to worry on behalf of others and intends to take the responsibility seriously. He sat next to Harry, helped himself to nothing, and said, You're both going to be brilliant. We know, Hermione said. Ron blinked. Right, yeah, okay, you are. He looked at Harry. You ready? Very, Harry said. What he did not say was that he'd woken at 5 in the morning with absolute clarity, the whole task laid out in front of him, every prepared response in its correct place, every contingency filed and ready. He'd lain in the dark for an hour feeling it, the shape of his own readiness, and thought, this is what she's been giving me. This is what it means to actually prepare. He thought about the lake. He thought about what was in it. He thought about the merfolk colony below in the cold, dark water with their hostages and their ancient magic and their particular view of the surface world and everyone in it. He thought about Hermione, who would be one of those hostages, his hostage, the person he'd sorely miss. He was going to be very fast. After breakfast, as the school moved toward the stands and the champions moved toward the lake's edge, Hermione walked next to Harry on the path with the specific quality of someone who has said everything they needed to say and is now simply present in the moment before the thing. She stopped at the lake's edge, where the water was dark and the cold came off it in visible waves. "Gillyweed," she said, handing him the small greenish plant from her pocket with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone completing a handoff they've planned for weeks. "Wait until you're in the water. I know, and the Grindylows, I know, and if you find me before you find whoever else, Hermione," he looked at her, "I know." She looked back at him for a moment, and the lake was cold and grey behind her, and the school was filling the stands, and somewhere under the water the merfolk were waiting, and she said, "Come back up." "Both of us," he said. "Both of us," she agreed. She turned and walked to where Madame Pomfrey was waiting to escort the hostages to the preparation area, and Harry watched her go with the specific feeling of someone watching something important move into the distance, and then he turned to face the lake and took a breath of cold February air and thought, "Right, let's go." The cannon fired. He waded in. The cold was extraordinary, total, encompassing. He pushed through the shallows, and at waist depth he put the gillyweed in his mouth and felt it happen, the transformation unpleasant and rapid and complete. Gills opening at his neck with a sensation like something stretching that had always wanted to, webbing pushing between his fingers, and then he was under the surface and the cold was no longer cold. It was simply the lake, and the lake was something he could move through. He dove. Below him the water went from grey to green to the specific dark of deep water, and the light diminished with depth, and Harry moved with the powerful efficiency of a body temporarily designed for exactly this, and somewhere below and ahead of him, the merfolk were waiting with his hostage. He was moving fast. He was moving very fast. And whatever was at the bottom of the lake, whatever guarded the path to the merfolk village, whatever the tournament had put between him and the golden egg and the person he needed to reach, Harry Potter, champion of Hogwarts, chosen by a castle that had been waiting for centuries for exactly this, was not inclined to be slowed down. He went deeper. The dark was complete. And somewhere down there Hermione was waiting. He dove harder. Chapter 5. What the maze knows. The lake gave Harry back to the surface at 46 minutes. He came up with Hermione under one arm and a Durmstrang student, a boy named Dimitri who'd been placed there for Crumb and who had been entirely patient about the whole situation, under the other. The cold hit him the moment his head cleared the water, the February air landing on wet skin with the particular brutality of something that had been waiting. His gills closed. His hands were hands again. He stood in the shallows and the crowd noise came back to him all at once like a door being opened in a loud room. Hermione surfaced next to him, gasping and then controlled, her hair plastered flat and her lips slightly blue, and she grabbed his arm for balance and then immediately released it once she'd found her footing because she was Hermione. 46 minutes, she said through chattering teeth. "I know, I was counting. The village was deeper than I estimated." "You must have had to," she looked at him. "Did you deal with the Grindylows?" Flipendo worked exactly as advertised, and the merman guard at the outer boundary swam around him. He was watching the approach from the east. "I came from below." She looked at him with the expression she wore when something confirmed a thing she'd hoped was true. "Below, you thought of that yourself." "During," he said. "You said adapt in the moment." "I said decide before and adapt after," she corrected, still shivering, but something in her face had the quality of a person who is pleased and organizing it into something more moderate. "That's yes, good." They waded out. Madame Pomfrey was there immediately with towels and warming charms and the specific urgency of someone who has been watching people climb out of a freezing lake all morning and has strong opinions about hypothermia. Ron materialized from somewhere in the crowd with the energy of someone who had been vibrating with anxiety for 46 minutes and was now dealing with the release of it by talking. "That was the thing with the Grindylows near the village entrance. Could everyone see that?" "Seamus could see that from the stands because you can see the glow when the spells hit below the surface," and Seamus said. "Ron," Harry said. "Right, yes, you're both okay, good." Ron exhaled. "Brilliant, obviously, but good." The scores came an hour later, after all 5 champions had surfaced and dried off and been checked over and fed hot soup that tasted like it had been made specifically to argue with cold. Harry had been first up, which meant he'd waited through Fleur's emergence. She'd come up without her hostage, unable to complete the rescue in the time available, which scored her lower than her first task standing, and Cedric's, who came up at 54 minutes with his hostage and a small collection of cuts from something that hadn't been a Grindylow but he hadn't identified yet. Crumb at 58 minutes, surfacing with Dimitri and the particular expression of a man who had been significantly colder than he expected to be and was managing his feelings about it. Harry's scores, 10-9, 10-10-9, 48 points. The 9 from Karkaroff was political theatre by now, so regular it had become almost comfortable. The second 9 from Crouch he'd earned, there was a points deduction for retrieving an extra hostage that wasn't assigned to him, which was a rule he found objectionable but couldn't argue with. Hermione's scores came second, 10, 10, 9, 10, 10, 49. She had beaten him by 1 point. He looked at her. She was sitting on a bench near the lake's edge, wrapped in a towel, holding her soup in both hands, and she was looking at the score parchment with the expression he'd expected, not triumphant, just the quiet acknowledgement of a confirmed calculation. 1 point, he said. Yes, Karkaroff gave you 10. He gave me 10, she said, with the specific satisfaction of someone for whom this data point meant more than the score itself. Which is interesting, isn't it? He gave Crumb 8. He gave you 9, so he's not randomly deducting, he's specifically scoring based on something he won't explain, which tells us something about who he thinks is the real threat in this tournament. She sipped her soup. It also tells us something about his relationship with Crumb, which has been deteriorating since January. She glanced over at where Crumb was sitting with 2 Durmstrang students, Karkaroff at a pointed distance. He expected Crumb to be manageable. Crumb is not being managed. Crumb doesn't seem like a person who's managed, Harry said. No, Hermione agreed. He's a person who decides. She looked at Harry over the rim of her cup, like someone else I know. He let that sit between them comfortably, the standing after 2 tasks, Hermione in first with 96 total points, Harry second with 95, Cedric third at 85, Crumb fourth at 82, Fleur fifth at 73. The gap between the top 2 and the rest was significant but not insurmountable, and everyone who had finished within 10 points of each other knew that the third task was historically worth the most and was weighted accordingly. The third task was the maze. They had 3 months. That felt like a long time in February, and then March happened, and March had the particular quality of months that pretend to be slower than they are. The champions received the third task announcement in a meeting with Bagman, who delivered it with his usual showmanship, but with a quality underneath it that Harry had started to notice, a kind of strained cheerfulness, as if someone had adjusted the tension on Bagman's natural exuberance and it was running slightly too tight. A maze, Bagman said, grown specially on the Quidditch pitch, you won't recognize it by June, full of obstacles, magical creatures, hexes, enchantments. The Triwizard Cup is at the center. First champion to touch it wins. What kind of obstacles? Hermione asked. All kinds. The specifics are, well, they're part of the challenge, aren't they? Figuring out what you're dealing with as you go. Are the obstacles fixed or do they shift? Bagman blinked. Shift. Do the maze walls and obstacles change position during the task, or are they static? It affects navigation strategy significantly. Bagman looked at Crouch. Crouch, who had been quieter than usual in recent weeks, with the specific quality of quiet that comes from someone maintaining something, looked at Bagman in return with the flat attention of someone outsourcing an answer. Some elements may be dynamic, Bagman said, with the careful wording of a man reading off a teleprompter he was inventing in real time, but the cup remains fixed at the center. What are the rules around champions encountering each other within the maze? Cedric asked. It was the kind of tactical question Harry would have expected from Harry, and Cedric delivered it with the pleasant calm of someone who had been thinking about this since the announcement. You're not to harm fellow champions. You may send up red sparks at any point to indicate you need extraction. You'll be removed from the task but not disqualified from your standing. Otherwise, Bagman spread his hands. It's up to you. Fleur looked at the door, and the professors monitoring the maze. Staff will be stationed at regular points around the perimeter, Crouch said. If anything irregular occurs, define irregular, Hermione said. Crouch looked at her with the expression he always had when she did this, something between professional respect and personal exhaustion. Anything outside the expected parameters of the task. And who defines the expected parameters? The organizing committee. Which includes yourself and Mr. Bagman, and which does not include the Hogwarts staff directly. She said it clearly, without accusation, as a simple enumeration of facts. So the expected parameters are yours to define. Crouch's jaw moved very slightly. That is correct. Thank you, she said, and wrote something. Outside the meeting, walking back up toward the castle, Crumb fell into step beside Harry. The maze walls, Crumb said quietly, they are not just growing. They are already grown in sections since early February. Karkaroff showed me a partial plan. Harry kept walking. Why? He wanted me to memorize the center section. He said it was an advantage he had inside information from the organizing committee. Crumb was quiet for a step or two. The plan he showed me was not a complete plan, and the section he showed me was specifically the path to the cup. He wants you to reach the cup first, Harry said. He wants me to touch the cup, Crumb said, precise word choice and deliberate. There is a difference. He looked at Harry sideways. The cup is a portkey, I believe this. Harry stopped walking. Crumb stopped too. Hermione, 2 steps ahead, turned back. He told you this, Harry said. He showed me on the plan. The cup's marker has a rune alongside it. I know this rune. At Durmstrang we study the dark variants of travel magic. That rune is a transport anchor. It is used to create a portkey that travels to a fixed point rather than a programmed one. Crumb looked at Harry steadily. A fixed point means a specific place already prepared, a specific place where someone is waiting, Hermione said. She had come back to them and was standing close now, her voice very low, her face doing the thing it did when a theory she'd been working towards suddenly connected to the evidence. The plan all along, she said. The tampered goblet, the portkey cup, someone touches the cup and goes to the fixed point, and whatever is waiting at the fixed point is ready for one champion, Harry said. Me. The silence on the path had the quality of something large settling. But there are 5 champions now, Cedric said. He had come out of the castle behind them and had apparently been close enough to hear or had heard enough to fill in the rest. And the cup can only be a portkey to one place. So whoever reaches it first, goes, Harry said, wherever they were meant to go. Which means we cannot let anyone reach it first who doesn't know what it is, Hermione said. And we cannot let anyone be sent to that place alone. She looked at Harry. We need to know who we can trust in that maze, and we need a plan. We have 3 months, Krum said. We have 3 months, she confirmed. She looked at each of them in turn, Krum, Cedric, Fleur, who had come out of the castle, and was watching from the door with the expression of someone who has been close enough to this conversation to know it matters. And we're going to use them. 3 months, it turned out, was exactly enough time. They trained. Not just individually, not just for the maze's obstacles, but in a new way that the tournament had not anticipated and the rules had not forbidden. Together, in the room of requirement, with the systematic intelligence that Hermione brought to the word prepared, and the practical adaptability that Harry contributed when theory met action, and Krum's deep physical competence and Cedric's creativity, and Fleur's technical precision, all feeding into something that was less a team and more a small ecosystem of mutual capability. Hermione built them a map. Not of the maze itself, which they didn't have access to, but of the principles, how magically grown mazes behaved, what creatures were historically used in Triwizard tasks, what hexes were most efficiently placed and where, how to navigate without visibility using magical sensing rather than sight. She cross-referenced it against historical tournament accounts, the 1792 records, the fragments she'd found in the founding charter, and the Hogwarts Library's collection of magical navigation texts. Harry practiced non-verbal spellcasting with the focused, unrelenting repetition of someone who had understood for the first time what the term under pressure actually meant. He worked with Ron in the evenings and Hermione in the afternoons and alone at night, going over the same spells until they were automatic enough to survive the kind of crisis where thinking was a luxury. The defense against the dark arts lessons with Moody continued, and Harry attended them with the specific quality of attention that comes from watching a person who doesn't know they're being watched as something other than a student. He'd shared Sirius's letters with Hermione, all of them now, the later ones increasingly urgent, Sirius clearly having pieced together something from his own sources that aligned uncomfortably with what Krum had said about the portkey. The portkey theory is right, Sirius had written in March. I know someone, I can't say who worked with Crouch SR years ago. Barty Crouch had a son. The son died in Azkaban officially. But I was in Azkaban and I know what dying in Azkaban looks like, and I know what the absence of a person looks like, and what I know is that the son wasn't there when I was there. He was gone before I was and nobody noticed because nobody was supposed to look. Hermione read that letter 3 times. Then she looked at Moody in the next lesson with a quality of attention she'd been careful not to deploy before, the full force of it, the kind of looking that was actually assessment. It's not him, she said that evening. Moody. The real Moody it's Crouch's son, she said. The polyjuice potion marks are consistent. There's a slight hesitation on certain vowel sounds in the Moody voice, like the original speaker was trained in a different phonological pattern. There's a behavioral inconsistency where he favors his right side under stress, but Moody's documented injuries from the 1970s should have created a left side compensation. And she paused. The real Moody wouldn't have helped me find the dragon approach last October. The real Moody doesn't help students. This one wanted us in the tournament. The real Moody would have been trying to get us out. Harry looked at her. You've been tracking this since October. Since the first meeting in the tent, she said. I wasn't certain until Krum's information about the portkey, but after that, she exhaled. It all locks together. Crouch's son is in the castle, pretending to be Moody, managing the tournament toward a specific conclusion. He needed you to reach the cup. He needed you to touch it first and go wherever it leads. And he needed you to be alone when you got there. And instead he's got 5 champions, 2 of whom know about the portkey, all of whom know about the plan. Yes, she said. He's been adapting. I think he's still trying to find a way to control the outcome from inside the maze. He'll have planted something in there, something designed to separate you from the others, or to incapacitate them. So we go in knowing that, Harry said. We go in knowing that, she confirmed. And we don't separate, and we're fast enough that whatever he's planted in there doesn't have time to work. The morning of the 3rd task was warm in the way that June evenings at Hogwarts were warm, not summer warm yet, but the specific warmth of a place that has come a long way from February and intends to make it evident. The Quidditch pitch had been unrecognizable for weeks. The maze had grown with the efficiency of something that had been doing it in stages since before the tournament started. The hedges 20 feet high now, dark green and solid and alive in the way that magically cultivated plants were alive. The families had been invited. Harry had known this in advance, had been told this in advance, and had thought about it in the detached way you think about things you've accepted and don't need to revisit. He had no family coming, or not the kind that received invitations in the normal way. He was wrong about that. In the crowd standing with the Weasleys was Sirius Black, not technically in the open, in the specific way that someone who has been a wanted fugitive learns to stand in crowds, present, real, but not centered, not salient. Harry saw him because Harry had been looking for him without knowing he was looking, and when he found him, the specific quality of Sirius being there in this place at this moment, which was a risk that spoke to how seriously Sirius took the letter he'd sent in May, landed in Harry's chest with a warmth that had nothing to do with the June air. Sirius caught his eye from across the crowd. He raised one hand, barely, just an acknowledgement, just "I'm here," and Harry nodded once. Hermione was beside him and she followed his eyeline and found Sirius, and she didn't say anything but she exhaled in a way that meant she was glad. She'd grown to value Sirius's information and his directness and the way he treated Harry like a person rather than a situation, and her gladness for Harry was clean and unperformed. "You ready?" she said, "same as always." "That's not an answer." "Yes," he said, "I'm ready." She looked at him the way she sometimes did now, the way that had developed over the year, the particular look that lived in the space between what they'd said at the Yule Ball and everything that had happened since, the accumulated weight of months of present between them. "Me too," she said. They took their positions at the entrance to the maze. The 5 champions stood in a line. Hermione first, her first place standing gave her position advantage. Harry second, Cedric third, Crumb fourth, Fleur fifth. The entrance gaps were staggered so they wouldn't begin at exactly the same point. Dumbledore spoke. Harry heard it a sound without specific words, the way you hear things when you're already inside what's coming. Bagman counted down. Harry looked at the maze. 20 feet of dark hedge, the entrance gap ahead of him, the cup somewhere at the center of a labyrinth that someone had designed to kill him. Or not to kill him, worse than that, to use him. He looked at the maze and decided in the moment before the cannon sounded that it was going to have to try harder than that. The cannon fired. He went in. The maze was dark in the way that places are dark when they've absorbed enough magic to have a quality beyond the simple absence of light. The hedges blocked the sky without entirely cutting it off. You could see a strip of stars above between the walls, enough to orient by, not enough to navigate by. Harry moved with the Lumo's tip of his wand reading the path ahead, his other hand keeping light contact with the left hedge, working the method Hermione had established, left-hand rule, track one wall consistently. It won't get you to the center, but it prevents you from running in circles. The first obstacle came at the third junction, a blast-ended Scroot. Not a fully grown one, the ones Hagrid had raised in 4th year had been bad enough, but this was larger, armored, with the particular aggressive energy of something that had been confined in a hedge maze for weeks and had opinions about it. It filled the corridor from hedge to hedge, its shell scraping both walls as it moved, its eyeless face oriented on the heat of Harry's body. Harry didn't stop moving. He had 1 second, maybe 2, before it closed the gap. He cast the blinding spell, a powerful stupefy aimed not at its body, which the shell would deflect, but at the exposed underside where its legs emerged from the carapace, and the impact sent it rearing up, claws scraping at the hedge walls, and Harry went under it at a sprint in the moment its underside was exposed and was through the junction before it landed. He kept moving. Left, right, another left, a long straight corridor where the silence had the particular quality of something held, and then from the hedge to his right, a sound, not an obstacle. A human sound, brief and sharp, cut off. He stopped. From his left, further off, a red spark went up, distress signal, he couldn't tell whose. He moved on. The second junction brought him to a boggart in a dead end. He registered it before it had fully resolved into its chosen form and hit it with ridiculous before it had committed to being anything specific, which felt like cheating but was actually just speed. Then the hedge wall beside him moved, not shifted, moved. Like something under the surface of the plant, something growing and redirecting simultaneously, the wall pressing inward at a pace that would close the corridor in 30 seconds. He moved before it had closed to half-width, the firebolt not available here but his own speed significant when he needed it to be, and he was through the narrowed gap before the hedge completed its intention. Dynamic obstacles, Hermione had said. The maze walls shift, not randomly, responsively. They respond to where you are, to what you're doing. The maze isn't passive. How do we account for that? We move faster than it can adapt. He moved faster. At the 7th junction he found Cedric. Cedric was on the ground, not unconscious, sitting, one hand braced on the hedge wall, his face set against something Harry recognized as pain. His left leg was extended in the wrong direction below the knee and he had his wand in his right hand and was managing, but barely. Harry was beside him in 4 steps. What happened? Something in the hedge. Cedric spoke through his teeth. Grabbed my ankle. I went down hard. I've set the bone, but he looked at Harry with the directness of someone who has assessed themselves accurately and is not going to waste time with heroics about it. I'm not finishing this task. Red sparks, Harry said. I know I'm going to. Cedric looked at him. Harry, listen to me. He lowered his voice. 20 meters north from here there's a junction. When I came through before I turned south, but north of the junction I could smell something wrong. Like ozone but heavier. Like a dark curse stored in space. A prepared trap, Harry said. Avoid north at that junction, go east. Cedric met his eyes. And get Hermione to the cup. Whoever gets there first, get there together, don't touch it alone. I know, good. Cedric raised his wand and sent up red sparks, the burst of crimson light above the maze visible from outside. Go, he said. I'm fine. Harry went. He found the junction Cedric meant and felt the north path before he saw it, a quality in the air exactly as described, the heaviness of stored magic, curse magic left for a specific target with a specific magical signature. He could almost feel the signature orientation, the specific tracking in the dark enchantment because it had been designed for him, and it broadcast that intent in the small ways that dark magic always did. He went east. The maze was getting lighter at its center, not from the sky but from a concentrated magical source ahead, the Triwizard Cup sitting in its clearing emitting the particular glow of an object that is also a purpose, and Harry was 50 feet from it when the hedge wall to his left opened and Hermione came through at speed. She was breathing fast. Her wand hand had a cut on the back of it that she hadn't stopped to address. Braid was gone, her hair doing what it always did when freed from restraint, asserting its full presence, and she looked at him with the specific quality of someone who has been moving very fast through very complicated things and is simultaneously delighted and concerned to have arrived here. Scroot, she said, went under it. Around, I found a gap in the hedge at the base. The plants are tightly woven but not completely solid at ground level she stopped. Cup is ahead. I know it's a portkey. I've known it's a portkey since March. She was looking at the cup ahead with the concentration of someone solving a specific problem. The question is where it goes and what we do when we get there. Sirius thinks. I know what Sirius thinks. I think he's right. She looked at Harry. We go together. Whatever it is, we face it together, which means, it means both hands on the cup, Harry said. Simultaneously, she said. Not one reaching for it and the other following together. And when we get there, we improvise. She said it cleanly, without apology, the statement of someone who has prepared for every scenario she could prepare for and has made peace with the existence of the one she couldn't. We're very good at improvising. We are, he agreed. They stood for a moment at the last junction before the cup's clearing. The hedges were quiet around them. The magical light was steady ahead. Somewhere behind them in the maze, Crumb was still moving. Harry had heard the distinctive impact of a spell connecting with something large about 6 minutes ago, heard the sound of continued movement, which meant Crumb was dealing with it and intact. Fleur's red sparks had gone up 20 minutes into the task, and that had been a small, specific grief in Harry's chest, not surprising but felt. There's something else in this clearing, Hermione said. She was reading the air the way she'd gotten better at doing over the year, the specific environmental sensitivity that came from 3 months of practicing magical sensing. Not an obstacle, a person. Harry felt it then too, the quality of presence, not the absence of it, which was what the maze path behind them had mostly offered. Something ahead in the clearing, waiting. Crouch's son, Harry said. Moody, she said, grimly. He'll be there to ensure the outcome. He can't rely on us just touching the cup, not now. He'll have something else ready. Then we deal with that first. In a clearing with the Triwizard Cup and a prepared Death Eater, she said. Between us, it wouldn't be a proper tournament otherwise, Harry said. She made a sound that was almost a laugh, then she straightened. Her wand was in her hand with the particular grip of someone who has stopped preparing and started doing, and she looked at Harry with the expression he'd come to understand as her version of ready, not the absence of concern, but its organization into something useful. Together, she said. Together, he confirmed. They stepped into the clearing. It was a large space, the hedges pulling back in a rough circle around it, the cup at the exact center on a plinth that hadn't been there in the original Quidditch pitch, the light it emitted falling evenly across the grass and the man standing 20 feet away from it with his wand already drawn. Moody, not Moody. He looked at them with the eye that wasn't the magical eye, the real one, dark and steady and focused, and the magical eye whirring in its socket but somehow less impressive now, less frightening, because Harry was looking at the man underneath the performance and seeing someone cornered. Someone whose plan had been degraded step by step, month by month, by two 14-year-olds who had refused to be what the plan required. You were never supposed to be here, the man said, not to Harry, to Hermione. His voice was Moody's voice, but the expression on his face was something else, not theatrical, not the growling paranoia of the performance. Something rawer, younger, a man who had spent years committed to a fixed idea of how things would go and was standing at the moment when the evidence had become undeniable. You were never supposed to be part of this. The castle had different ideas, Hermione said pleasantly. His wand moved. Crucio, Harry was already moving. Not toward Hermione, she was already moving too, both of them having had the same instinct in the same moment, diverging left and right simultaneously, and the curse went between them and hit the hedge wall, and the hedge wall flinched, and they were 10 feet apart now, flanking, with the man between them and the cup behind him. Expelliarmus, Harry said, non-verbal intention preceding the spoken word, the spell leaving his wand with the combined force of months of practice and genuine fury at the sight of that incantation directed at the person standing to his left. Petrificus totalis, Hermione said, half a second behind and from the other side. Both spells hit. The disarming charm took his wand out of his hand and sent it spinning into the hedge. The full body bind took the rest. The man collapsed completely, locked solid from head to foot. his one natural eye open and fixed on the sky above the clearing with the expression of someone who has had the wind taken out of something very old and very specific. The magical eye kept spinning. Harry walked to where the wand had landed in the hedge and retrieved it. He held it. It was Moody's wand, borrowed, stolen, used. He looked at the man on the ground. "Bartemius Crouch," he said. "Junior," the man said nothing. He couldn't say anything. But his eye moved, just that one visible one, the natural dark eye, and it found Harry's face, and something in it changed. Not capitulation, something more honest than that, something that might have been in a different person at a different moment, close to relief. "You were willing to die for him," Harry said, "not accusation, observation, all of this, everything you've done, you actually believe he's worth it." The eye stayed on him. "He's not," Harry said, quietly, flatly, without drama, just a statement of fact in the same way he stated facts he was certain of. "He doesn't see people, not even you." He turned away. Hermione was at the cup. She was looking at it the way she looked at most things, carefully, completely, with the full force of her attention on its specifics. She reached into her pocket and produced a length of cord which she'd apparently prepared for exactly this situation, and Harry was not remotely surprised by that. "What are you doing?" he said. "I'm not touching the portkey accidentally," she said. She tied one end of the cord around the cup's plinth in a specific knot, not touching the cup itself, and held the other end out to Harry. "When we're ready, both hands on the cord. If we hold the cord instead of the cup, the portkey activation may require direct contact with the object, but it may not. The activation is a magical trigger, not a physical one. The physical contact is conventional, not strictly necessary for portkey function. If the enchantment is strong enough to be triggered by the cord, we go. If it isn't," she looked at him, "we've just discovered that the portkey requires direct contact and we adjust. And if it triggers and we go somewhere terrible, then we're together somewhere terrible," she said, "and those situations are significantly easier to manage than being alone somewhere terrible." He took the cord. They looked at each other. The clearing was very still. The man on the ground was still bound. The cup glowed. Above the maze, the night sky had come fully into the space between the hedges, stars present and cold and indifferent to Triwizard tournaments. "Harry," she said. "Yeah. Whatever happens next." She looked at him steadily, the way she'd been looking at him since October, since the night in the corridor with the suit of armor and the conjunctivitis practice and the warm air from nowhere, the accumulated months of it. "I need you to know that this year, being chosen alongside you, working with you, all of it, it's been..." She stopped. She was not someone who stopped mid-sentence often. She was someone who knew what she wanted to say before she said it. "It's been the best year," she said. "I'm glad it was us." Harry held the cord in his left hand, and the knowledge of what she'd just said in everything else. He looked at her and thought about how there were things you understood and things you felt, and the most important things were the ones where the understanding and the feeling arrived at the same time, from the same place. "Same," he said. And then, because same was not quite sufficient, because she deserved better than his usual economy of words at this specific moment, "I wouldn't have wanted to do this with anyone else, not any of it." She looked at him for one moment more, just a moment, the specific moment that sits between a thing being said and a thing being known, and then she nodded. "Ready," she said. "Ready," he said. They gripped the cord. The portkey activated. The world unwound. The spinning was violent and total and indiscriminate in the way portkey travel always was. The specific chaos of being moved through space by magic that treated the body as a cargo rather than a passenger. And then it stopped. Cold air. Different cold than the maze, damp and ancient and mineral. The smell of earth that had not been disturbed in a very long time. They landed in a rough circle of ancient headstones, a stone angel at one end of the circle, a yew tree at the other, and at the yew tree, bound with ropes and white as wax, a shape that Harry recognized from his very worst dreams. A cauldron, a fire, a small horrible thing in Wormtail's arms. Wormtail saw them and screamed, not in fear, in shock, absolute destabilizing shock. He looked at them, both of them, two people where the plan had called for one, and the small thing in his arms made a sound that was not human and not animal. And Wormtail's face went through terror and confusion and the specific quality of a man whose instructions have just become insufficient. "Him," the thing in his arms said. The voice was cold and high and carried the quality of something that had been forced into a shape too small for what it was. "Him I expected. What is she doing here?" "I'm with him," Hermione said. She said it completely steadily. Her wand was already up. Her grip was certain. Her face showed nothing that could be used against her, nothing that gave the thing in the cauldron any territory. Harry's wand was up too. His heart was running fast, but his hand was still. He looked at the cauldron, at Wormtail, at the thing, and felt the cold of the graveyard and the weight of the moment and the specific knowledge that this was what all of it had been moving toward, that all the plans and contingencies and preparation had been pointing here, to this circle of headstones in the dark, with Voldemort in a cauldron and two Hogwarts champions who had arrived where they were not supposed to arrive, together. "You," the thing said to Harry, and even in its current diminished state it had the voice's authority, the specific cold focus of something that has wanted something for a long time and is finally looking at it. "You will die here tonight." "Probably not," Harry said. The thing's eyes, red, and Harry felt them the way you feel something that should not be looked at directly, moved to Hermione. And in that movement, in the specific quality of the attention the thing gave to Hermione, Harry saw something that reconfigured his sense of the moment. The thing had not expected her, and the thing was afraid of what that meant. Not of her specifically, not of a 14-year-old girl from Hogwarts, not in the terms it understood power, but of the variable she represented, the unplanned element, the proof that the plan had failed at its foundation. Crucio. Wormtail cast it, desperate and unsteady, aimed at Hermione Protego. Harry threw the shield between them with a speed and force that came from a year of this specific preparation. This specific fear made actionable, and the curse deflected and hit the headstone to his left, and the stone cracked along its length. Hermione returned fire immediately, not the unforgivables, not dark magic, something better. A blasting curse at the cauldron itself, aimed not at the creature but at Wormtail's grip on it, at the silver hand that held the horrible small body, and the impact jarred his arm and he staggered and the thing made its terrible sound again, and for one critical second Wormtail was off balance. Now, Hermione said, the ritual needs the cauldron. Without it, incendio, Harry said at the fire beneath the cauldron. Incendio as a basic fire spell was unremarkable. Incendio cast by someone who had been practicing non-verbal casting for 8 months, with the specific intent of making every spell he knew carry as much force as it could possibly carry, was not basic. The fire surged, hot and sudden and enormous, and the cauldron temperature spiked and the liquid inside hissed, and the small thing in Wormtail's arms made a sound like nothing Harry ever wanted to hear again. But Wormtail had recovered. He was backing toward the yew tree, clutching the thing to him, his silver hand extended with his wand pointed at them both, and behind him the fire was doing something unexpected, not extinguishing, not growing, but changing color. Blue-gold. The same blue-gold as the goblet on the night they'd been chosen. The castle, Harry thought distantly, wildly, even here. The ritual cannot be completed tonight, Hermione said loudly to Wormtail, but also to the thing he carried. You need specific astronomical conditions and the ritual components you've prepared, and we have just compromised the main component. This was already your one available window this year. She said it with the authority of someone who has read the relevant texts. Leave, we're not chasing you tonight, leave or we finish this here. Wormtail looked at the thing. The thing looked at Harry with its red eyes. The fire burned blue-gold and the graveyard held the silence of many dead watching something that had not yet been decided. This is not over, the thing said to Harry. I know, Harry said. You cannot always have someone beside you. Harry glanced at Hermione. She was looking at Voldemort without flinching, her jaw set, her wand steady, absolutely present in the way she was present for everything that mattered. He looked back. Watch me, he said. Wormtail did something with the portkey, a different portkey, small and dark, a stone in his silver palm, and they were gone. The fire extinguished. The graveyard went quiet with the specific silence of a place that has had something pass through it and registered its absence. Harry and Hermione stood in the dark between the headstones. The cord from the Triwizard cup was still in Harry's left hand. His wand was in his right. Hermione was beside him, close enough that he could hear her breathing, fast, still, controlled, the breathing of someone managing an enormous amount of adrenaline with the specific efficiency she brought to managing everything. He's not dead, Harry said. No, Hermione said. He'll try again. Yes. She looked at the space where Wormtail and the thing had been, but not tonight and not in secret. She turned to him. We're witnesses, Harry, both of us, 2 people who were there, who can describe what they saw, who can testify to the Ministry and the Wisengamot and whoever else needs to hear it. One person, she stopped. One person can be discredited, can be dismissed, can be called traumatized or mistaken or attention-seeking. She looked at him directly. 2 people is a different thing entirely. He looked at her. He thought about what she'd said and what it meant and the specific intelligence of it, the way she was already several steps ahead of the crisis and finding the leverage points. The castle knew that too, he said, didn't it? It chose 2 of us because one wasn't enough, not just for the tasks. Not just for the tasks, she said quietly, for everything after. The portkey, still active, still valid, pulled at them. Harry looked at the cord in his hand, then at Hermione. Ready to go back, he said. More than ready, she said. He offered his hand, not the cord, his hand. She looked at it for one brief second and then she took it and they took the cord together and the world went sideways again and they came back up through the spinning dark and into the warm June air of Hogwarts, landing on the grass outside the maze with the impact of people who have been somewhere significant and are grateful to be back. The crowd was on its feet before they'd finished landing. Harry was on one knee and Hermione was beside him and they were both holding each other's hand and the cord from the Triwizard cup. And the cup was between them on the grass, golden and glowing, and whatever the crowd had been expecting from the third task's conclusion, it was not this, and they were making the noise that people make when something outstrips their capacity to have expected it. Harry looked at Hermione. Her hair was everywhere. Her robes were torn at one shoulder. The cut on the back of her hand had bled a little and stopped. She was looking back at him with the expression that he was going to be thinking about for a very long time, the one that lived in the space where relief and something that was not just relief occupied the same moment together. We are back, she said. We are back, he confirmed. Then Dumbledore was there and McGonagall and everyone else at speed, and Harry said clearly and immediately before anything else could happen or anyone could organize the narrative differently, Voldemort was in that graveyard, we were both there, we both saw him. He felt Hermione's hand tighten once in his, confirming, present. "We both saw him," she said, "and we're going to tell you everything." Chapter 6. The castle answers. Dumbledore moved faster than Harry had ever seen him. Not running, Dumbledore didn't run exactly, but he covered the distance from the maze entrance to the two champions on the grass, with the kind of velocity that comes from a very old man deciding that the usual performance of unhurriedness is no longer appropriate. He was beside them before the crowd had fully registered that something beyond the expected had occurred, crouching to their level with a disregard for his robes that told Harry more about the urgency he felt than any expression would have. "Are you hurt?" he said, both of them looking at both of them. "No," Harry said. "Minor," Hermione said, which was her version of no. "The graveyard," Dumbledore said. "Little Hangleton, I'd imagine, the Riddle family plot." "You already know where it was," Harry said. "I knew where it would be if it was going to be anywhere." Dumbledore stood, and something about the motion had the weight of a man carrying a very long reckoning finally arriving at its moment. "Come with me, both of you, now." The crowd, McGonagall started, appearing at his elbow with the speed of someone who had been watching from the perimeter and had been watching very carefully. "The crowd can wait," Dumbledore said, which was something Harry had never heard him say in 4 years, and the directness of it cut through the surrounding noise and landed with a particular authority. They went to his office. All of them, Harry, Hermione, Dumbledore, McGonagall and Moody, who joined them on the path and whom Dumbledore addressed as Alastor until Harry said, clearly and without preamble, "That isn't Moody," and watched Dumbledore's face confirm what he'd already suspected the headmaster knew. "No," Dumbledore said quietly, "it isn't." He looked at the man with the magical eye who had gone very still. "Severus," Dumbledore said, to no one apparently present, and Snape materialized from somewhere near the castle entrance with the efficiency of a man accustomed to appearing on request. What followed in the corridor outside the gargle was quick and unpleasant. Dumbledore incapacitated the man wearing Moody's appearance with a spell Harry didn't recognize, and Snape produced something from his robes, and the combination of effects over the following minutes unwound the Polyjuice transfiguration in a way that was genuinely terrible to witness. The form dissolving, the borrowed features receding, a much younger man visible underneath. Gaunt and dark-eyed and looking at Harry with the specific quality of someone who has carried a conviction all the way to its terminus, and found the terminus is not what they expected, Bartemius Crouch Jr. He looked nothing like his father except in the jaw, and that resemblance was the most unsettling thing about him. "He'll need to be secured," McGonagall said with the clipped efficiency of someone converting horror into action. "Poppy first," Dumbledore said, "then secured." He looked at Harry. "Go upstairs, I'll be there shortly." Harry and Hermione went up. Dumbledore's office at this hour was lit by the instruments on their shelves, the small whirring silver things that emitted light as a byproduct of whatever they measured, and by a fire that had been burning all evening and had settled into the amber-deep quality of something long burning. The portraits were awake, all of them, the former headmasters and headmistresses in their frames, watching without speaking, which was unusual enough that Hermione noticed it and said nothing. Harry sat in the chair across from Dumbledore's desk. Hermione sat beside him. Neither of them chose the slightly further chairs. They sat directly in front of the desk, close enough that their shoulders were a few inches apart, and neither of them moved away. When Dumbledore arrived, he did not go to his chair immediately. He went to the cabinet behind his desk and retrieved 2 things, a bottle of something amber warm and 2 small glasses, and a silver bowl that Harry had seen before, the pensive, which he set on the edge of his desk and looked at for a moment before turning to face them. He sat down. For a long moment he looked at them both with the look that Harry had spent 4 years trying to read and never entirely succeeding, the one that contained genuine feeling and something held back, and the specific quality of a man who is deciding in real time how much to explain. Harry had spent the walk up the spiral staircase deciding that he wasn't going to make it easier for Dumbledore to manage this conversation, not out of hostility, but because there were things he deserved to be told directly rather than navigated toward, and he'd waited long enough for them. "You knew," Harry said, "about the portkey, about what was planned for the tournament." "I suspected," Dumbledore said. "Since when?" "Since August." He said it without deflection, which surprised Harry enough that he let it sit for a moment. "I received information, indirect, from a source I cannot name but whose reliability I have reason to trust, that an attempt would be made to use the tournament to restore Voldemort. I did not know the mechanism. I suspected the goblet. I increased precautions where I could." "But you let it happen," Hermione said, not accusation, the measured statement of someone working through a logical sequence. "You knew an attempt would be made and you didn't cancel the tournament." "No," Dumbledore said, "I didn't." "Why?" He looked at her for a moment. "Because cancelling the tournament would have told whoever was planning this that I knew, and if they knew I knew, they would have found a different way, a worse way, in a place and time where I had no warning and no preparation. The tournament at least gave me a controlled environment in which Harry was the target," Hermione said. "Yes. That's a considerable calculation to make with someone else's safety." "Yes," Dumbledore said again, and this time the word carried something more, not quite guilt, but its close relative, the specific weight of someone who has made a choice they stand behind and is not pretending it was costless. It is, and I will not insult either of you by claiming otherwise. He looked at Harry directly. I owe you more honesty than I have given you, Harry. I have operated for too long on the assumption that protecting you meant managing the information you had access to. He paused, and the pause was genuine, incorrect about that. Harry sat with it. The fire crackled. Fawkes on his perch watched them all with the patient attention of a bird that measures time in centuries. The castle, Harry said. The Selector's flame. You knew what it was when Hermione's name came out. Dumbledore looked at the pensive for a moment, then at Harry. I had hoped it would stay dormant, he said. I had hoped. He stopped, started again. The Selector's flame was last used in 1612. I knew its function. When I felt the castle's intervention during the goblet's selection, I was not surprised in the way the others were surprised. I was surprised by the timing. And by which two students it chose, Hermione said. No, Dumbledore said. He looked at her with the specific clarity of the first completely unguarded thing he'd said. I was not surprised by that at all. Hermione looked at him. Something moved across her face, not the usual organized processing, something less managed, like a person hearing something they had not permitted themselves to fully expect. You knew it would be us, Harry said. I knew it would be you, Dumbledore said. It has always been you. The prophecy, the specific nature of your connection to Voldemort made that a near certainty. That the flame chose Hermione, he looked at her, was less certain. But I had thought about who you would need beside you, who would be capable and willing and present in the way that matters most. He picked up the amber bottle and poured, and the gesture had the quality of someone doing something to buy a moment. The flame chose better than I could have arranged, which is perhaps the point of the flame. It doesn't choose power, Hermione said slowly. It chooses suitability for the specific situation, precisely so. And it chose me because this situation needed someone who would understand it, Dumbledore said. Not just face it, understand it, know why it was happening, what it meant, how to interpret it. Harry faces things with extraordinary instinct and extraordinary courage. He looked at her, you give those things direction. You have been doing that for 4 years, and the castle noticed before anyone with the authority to do something about it did. The fire went on being amber and warm, and the portraits went on watching, and Hermione was quiet for a moment in a way that Harry recognized, the specific quiet of a person absorbing something they had not allowed themselves to want because wanting it made it frightening. What do we do now? Harry said. Now, Dumbledore said, and he sounded tired in a way he rarely let himself sound. We tell the truth, completely and without management. He looked at Harry. You and Hermione will write a full account of everything that occurred in that graveyard. Tonight, while it is complete in your memory, both of your accounts, independent and uncoordinated, I will take them to the Ministry tonight, and I will not give Minister Fudge the option of filing them away. He'll try, Hermione said. He will try, Dumbledore agreed. He is a man whose political survival depends on Voldemort not returning. The truth is inconvenient to him in the most fundamentals. He will call you both confused, traumatized, seeking attention, and he will do it with the specific force of someone who believes that if he can manage the public narrative, he can manage the fact. He's wrong, Harry said. He is wrong, and we are going to demonstrate that he is wrong in terms that he cannot administratively process away. Dumbledore looked at them both. 2 witnesses, 2 accounts. 2 champions of Hogwarts, selected by ancient magic that predates the Ministry by several centuries, who went to a graveyard where a man was attempting to restore the most dangerous dark wizard in 100 years and who came back to tell it. He looked at Harry specifically. There is something to be said for being chosen by the castle over being chosen by a system that can be corrupted. The former carries a legitimacy the latter cannot manufacture. You're going to use us, Harry said. Not angry, just clear. I am going to use your testimony, Dumbledore said. There is a difference, and I am asking for your consent to it. I am not arranging you. I am asking if you will stand and say what you saw. Harry looked at Hermione. She looked back. The question had a shape to it, not just will you but are you ready to, and the answer was already in her face before she said it. The answer that had been developing all year, all the preparation and the practice and the understanding of why they were here building to this specific point. Yes, Hermione said. Yes, Harry said. Dumbledore nodded. He picked up a quill and placed 2 blank pieces of parchment on the desk. Begin, he said simply. They wrote. Sirius was waiting in the corridor outside Dumbledore's office when they came down 3 hours later, which was either an extraordinary coincidence or evidence of the specific information network that Sirius maintained despite being a wanted fugitive. He looked at them both, the quick, complete look of someone who has been very afraid for several hours and is now running an assessment to confirm the fear was survivable. Then he hugged Harry. Not the careful, managed hug of the Hogsmeade meetings, where surveillance was always possible and duration mattered. A full, uncomplicated hug that lasted long enough to mean something. Harry let it. He leaned into it because he was exhausted in a way that went deeper than physical tired, the specific exhaustion of a year of sustained alertness finally being allowed to set down some of its weight. Sirius released him and looked at Hermione and held out his hand. She shook it. Then Sirius pulled her into a brief hug too, which appeared to surprise her, and when he let her go her expression had the quality of someone recalibrating in a pleasant direction. You're both all right, Sirius said. He said it as confirmation rather than question. We're all right, Harry said. Dumbledore's going to the Ministry. Yes, tonight. That was the plan. Harry leaned against the corridor wall. The stone was cool against his back. Fudge is going to push back. Fudge is going to push back so hard he'll need medical attention, Sirius said, but he won't be able to ignore two champion-level witnesses who were both placed in a life-threatening situation by a ministry-organized event. The liability alone, he paused, and the lawyer-like calculation in the phrasing reminded Harry that Sirius had come from a family that knew how to use institutional systems even while despising them. He'll try to discredit you, you know that. We expect it, Hermione said, which is why our accounts needed to be written tonight independently with specific and corroborating details, before anyone had the opportunity to suggest that our memories were, she stopped, before anyone could suggest we were telling someone else's story rather than our own. Sirius looked at her with an expression that Harry had learned was Sirius's version of being impressed, not wide-eyed, just a kind of focused attention, a recalibration. Been preparing for the aftermath as long as you've been preparing for the tasks. Since January, she said, when we confirmed the Portkey theory, whatever was in the graveyard, we were going to come back from it and it was going to matter what we said. One voice can be discredited, two voices with written accounts from the same evening, Sirius said, that corroborate each other without having been compared are significantly harder to dismiss than one. He nodded. Yes, smart. He looked at Harry. You chose well having her with you. The castle chose, Harry said. And the castle chose well, Sirius said. He pushed off the wall. Go to bed, both of you. You'll be needed tomorrow and it'll be better if you've slept. Will it? Harry said. No, Sirius admitted. But it's good advice anyway. Harry did not sleep. He lay in the dormitory with the curtains closed against the grey pre-dawn and thought about the graveyard, and about the thing in Wormtail's arms, and about the voice that had said you cannot always have someone beside you, with the certainty of something that had been calculating weaknesses for a long time. He thought about the fire going blue-gold. He thought about the corridor after, standing between the headstones in the dark with Hermione's hand in his, the cord from the cup between them and the specific feeling of having faced something very large and come back from it intact. He thought about the year, all of it from the night the goblet went gold and two names came out instead of one to this dormitory ceiling in the first hours of a June morning, the dragon in November, the lake in February, the maze tonight. The accumulation of it, the way it had built not just competence but something harder to name, a quality of knowing yourself through how you responded when the situation stopped being theoretical. He thought about Hermione. He thought about the way she'd said I'm glad it was us, standing in the clearing with the cup between them, and he thought about the way she'd taken his hand before the Portkey, and the way she'd told Voldemort I'm with him without a tremor, and the way she'd looked when Dumbledore said the castle's choice was not one he'd been surprised by. He thought about these things and he lay in the dark and was very awake. In the morning, at breakfast, the castle was full of the specific energy of a place that has had something very large happen in it, and hasn't yet decided how to process it. There were rumors, there were always rumors at Hogwarts within hours of anything, the school's information network operating with a speed that suggested the portraits talked more than they officially admitted, and the rumors were confused and contradictory, and in some cases entirely unrelated to the actual events, in the way that rumors always drifted from their source. Harry and Hermione sat at the Gryffindor table and ate breakfast, and around them the school did its thing, and Harry felt with the particular clarity that comes after a sleepless night that something had settled. Not resolved, there was nothing resolved about Voldemort in a graveyard, nothing settled about what was coming, nothing finished about the year's worth of plans that had been prevented but not dismantled, but something in himself had settled. Something about knowing what he'd faced and what he'd done with it. Ron arrived with Ginny, which was unusual, and Ginny looked at Harry with an expression that said she knew more than she'd been told and had worked out the rest, which was very Ginny. She sat down without drama and said, "You both look terrible." "Thank you," Hermione said. "Are you all right, actually?" "Actually," Harry said. "Yes." Ginny looked between them and seemed to conclude this was true or true enough. She reached across and helped herself to toast. "Fred and George say there was something in the maze that wasn't on Bagman's obstacle list." "Several things," Hermione said, including a person, Harry confirmed. Ginny's jaw set in the specific way that Weasley jaws set when Weasleys had opinions they were deciding how vigorously to express. "Right," she said. "Good that you both came back then." "Very," Ron said, sitting down with considerably more food than usual, the comfort eating of someone who had been afraid for a long time and was now feeding the relief. The Daily Prophet arrived with the post, as it always did, and the front page was already running a version of the story, garbled, partial, clearly written in the window between the task's conclusion and whatever Dumbledore had or hadn't yet told them. The headline said, "Unprecedented Hogwarts Triumph, Potter and Gingr claim Triwizard Cup in shocking joint victory." Below it, in smaller type, something about incident reported, ministry officials en route. Harry looked at the word incident. It was doing a lot of work as a word. "They know something happened," Hermione said, reading over his shoulder, "but they don't know what yet. Fudge will have been woken up this morning and he'll be constructing his response as we read this." "Then we need to get there first," Harry said. She looked at him. Dumbledore is working at Dumbledore's pace, which is measured and careful and effective but not fast. The fastest thing we can do right now," he paused, thinking it through, "is make sure that when Fudge tries to control what the public knows, there's already a version of events in the public that doesn't go through the ministry." "You want to give a statement?" she said, not asking. "Not just me," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Around them the great hall continued its breakfast noise, oblivious, and the post owls were still arriving, and the candles were lit, and the enchanted ceiling showed an early June morning that was going to be warm later, all the ordinary texture of a place that didn't yet fully know how different today was from yesterday. "Both of us," she said. "Both of us," he confirmed. "Not to Skeeter, absolutely not Skeeter. But there are other journalists, there's the Quibbler, and there are the international publications that don't answer to Fudge, and there are Wisengamot members Dumbledore trusts who need to hear it in our words, not his summary." He looked at her. "You said 2 voices, make them loud." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her quill and pulled a piece of parchment from her bag, which she always had because she was always carrying what she might need, and she began making a list. "Right," she said. "First, we go to Dumbledore and tell him what we're planning so he can coordinate rather than be surprised. Second, I draft a statement, factual, specific, corroborated, designed for maximum clarity and minimum editorializing. Third," she paused. "Third, we find out who else was at the graveyard last night." Harry looked up. Wormtail, Voldemort, Bartemius Crouch Jr. was in this castle for an entire year. He had contact with at least one other person who knew Voldemort's plan. Karkaroff's behavior this year has been consistent with a man who knows something and is terrified of being on the wrong side of it. "There may be others," she wrote. "Every connection is evidence, every name is a thread." She looked up. "Voldemort didn't fail last night because he wasn't strong enough. He failed because the plan he'd spent a year building was designed around one person arriving alone, and instead 2 people arrived together and didn't behave like the plan required. He'll redesign the plan," Harry said. "Yes, but we have time now, the time his failure gives us." She capped her quill. "We should use it." Harry nodded. He picked up his juice. He felt for the first time in a long time, not the heavy awareness of something approaching but the specific alertness of someone who has met the approaching thing, and found that meeting it had not destroyed them. That was different. That was a thing he could work with. Dumbledore received them in his office at 9 in the morning, which suggested he either hadn't slept or had slept briefly and efficiently in the way that very old wizards apparently could. He looked at them with the look that Harry had started to understand better, the one that contained both care and calculation, the genuine and the strategic overlapping in ways that were uncomfortable to see clearly but important to understand. "The ministry," Harry said. "I met with Fudge at 6 this morning," Dumbledore said. He said it with the quality of a man reporting on an encounter with difficult weather. "As expected. He is pursuing a narrative of exhaustion, combined stress, the psychological effects of a dangerous tournament producing confused testimony. He's calling us liars," Hermione said. "He's calling you mistaken," Dumbledore said, which is the ministry's preferred version of the same conclusion. "There is a distinction with a practical significance. Liars can be held responsible, but a mistaken child is simply to be managed and corrected." "And you," Harry said. "I told him he was incorrect and that the evidence, once assembled, would demonstrate this to anyone not invested in ignoring it." Dumbledore looked at them both. "He sent someone to retrieve Crouch Jr. from Hogwarts last night. The someone he sent was a Dementor." The word landed in the room with its own weight. "He gave Crouch Jr. the kiss," Harry said flatly. "Yes, so the most important witness is no longer able to testify," Dumbledore said. "Yes. I was not fast enough to prevent this. I regret it." He said it without excessive performance, a clean, direct statement of regret from someone who understood its dimensions. "It also means that the ministry's strategy is now committed. They will actively suppress the truth of last night. Every piece of evidence that reaches the public must come from sources they cannot discredit through administrative process." "That's why we're here," Hermione said. "I assumed it might be," he said. She placed her draft statement on his desk, 2 pages, dense and precise, a factual account of the graveyard with specific details and specific corroboration. He read it. He read it carefully, with the full attention he gave things he took seriously, which was most things, and when he looked up his expression had the quality of someone who is not surprised but is nonetheless moved. "This is very good," he said. "I know," she said, and it wasn't arrogance, it was the honest assessment of someone who had chosen their words with precision and knew it. "I want to send it to 3 places simultaneously. The Quibbler, I know it's not taken seriously, but Luna Lovegood's father will print exactly what I give him without editing it for political palatability. The European Wizarding Tribune, which operates out of Brussels and is outside the British Ministry's jurisdiction. And the Wisengamot member you trust most, who is also most trusted by the other members you trust less." Dumbledore looked at her. "You've thought about the distribution carefully. The goal isn't to have the story published. The goal is to make it impossible to suppress. Those are different goals and they require different strategies." She looked at him steadily. "The Quibbler gives us public record. Even if people don't take it seriously initially, it's dated, it's published, it can't be walked back. The Tribune gives us international pressure. The moment Voldemort becomes an international news story, the British ministry can't manage it internally anymore. And the Wisengamot contact gives us political leverage, someone in the system who has our account and knows what it contains before Fudge has prepared his counter-narrative. There was a silence in the office in which Dumbledore looked at Hermione Granger with an expression that Harry had never seen on his face before. Not the usual affection for students look, not the strategic assessment, something more direct than either, the look of a man who has just seen something he has been looking for and finding it has arrived exactly when it was needed. The name you're looking for, Dumbledore said, is Amelia Bones. They sent the letters by mid-morning, using 3 different owls from the owlery, not school owls which could be monitored, but Harry's Hedwig and 2 owls borrowed from Hagrid, who asked no questions and gave them extra treats. The day was complicated and full. Madame Pomfrey made them come in for a health check that they endured with impatience. McGonagall called a small meeting with Harry, Hermione and herself that lasted 20 minutes, and in which she said fewer words than her expression, and ended with her squeezing Harry's shoulder, once, briefly, in the specific way that McGonagall expressed things she had decided not to say. Krum found them in the afternoon, on the lawn near the lake where they'd gone because the castle had become fully populated with students and visitors wanting proximity to what had happened, and the lawn offered space. He sat on the grass without preamble and looked at the lake. "I heard," he said, "about the graveyard." He was quiet for a moment. "I should have been there." "You were in the maze," Harry said. "I was delayed." "Something in the maze, a spell I did not recognize, a dark enchantment on the East Passage. It held me for 11 minutes. He looked at Harry. "It was placed for me specifically, designed for my magical signature." Crouch Jr. prepared the maze from the inside, Hermione said. "He would have had months to plant targeted enchantments for each champion. He wanted to make sure I was late to the cup," Krum said. "He didn't want me there." He looked at his hands. "He placed that enchantment because he was afraid of what I would do if I arrived when you arrived." He glanced at them. He was right to be afraid. Harry believed that completely. "You believe he is back?" Krum said. "Vol the Dark One." "We know he is," Harry said. "We were in the same graveyard." Krum was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the lake, its flat grey surface, the occasional suggestion of movement far out in the deep water. "At Durmstrang," he said carefully, "there are people who believe the Dark One's return is desirable. Karkaroff is one, some of the older students, some of the staff." He said it with the flatness of something stated rather than confessed. "I am not one of them, but I want you to know I understand what this means in a way that some of your British wizards may not understand yet. Because you've been closer to it," Hermione said. "Because Karkaroff served him," Krum said. "Karkaroff ran this morning, packed his things and was gone before breakfast, which means he knew last night that something had changed." He looked at Harry. He did not look like a man who believed in a victorious master returning. He looked like a man who had chosen the wrong side and knew the accounting was coming. "He'll run," Harry said. "He'll keep running." "He will not run far enough," Krum said, with the flat certainty of someone who knows the geography of the thing he's describing. "Dark One does not tolerate," he stopped. "He is precise about failure." They sat by the lake in the June afternoon, the 3 of them, and the water was calm and the castle was behind them and the summer was fully arrived in the way that Hogwarts summers arrived, suddenly and completely. "What will you do?" Harry asked Krum. "After this, when the tournament is officially closed." Krum was quiet for a moment. "I will go back to Durmstrang," he said. "I will not be quiet about what I know." He looked sideways at Harry. "And I will be available if there is work that needs doing, real work." He said it with the specific weight of someone choosing a commitment rather than describing an intention. Harry looked at him. "You trust us with that?" "I trust you," Krum said. He said it simply, without elaboration, the way he said everything important. Beside Harry, Hermione said nothing. But she was looking at Krum with the expression of someone who is revising the limits of what she expected from the year, finding those limits have been exceeded in multiple directions simultaneously. "Thank you," she said. Krum nodded his minimal nod and looked at the lake. The official closing of the tournament was scheduled for that evening, a ceremony that had been designed months ago for a triumphant conclusion, and was now attempting to accommodate a reality that had gone significantly past triumph into something more complicated. Bagman, who had apparently spent most of the day in a state of what Harry could only describe as spiraling, was absent from the ceremony. Someone had mentioned Bagman owed money to a number of people, and the events of the previous evening had accelerated certain discussions. The judges assembled, the champions assembled, the school assembled, the families of students assembled, and among them the Weasleys, serious at their edge in a way that was technically concealed and practically obvious to anyone paying attention. Crouch SR was absent. He had been found on the Hogwarts grounds earlier in the week dead, which now carried a different significance than it had when they'd first heard it. Not a tragic accident, but another element of the plan, a loose end that Crouch Jr. had dealt with. Dumbledore addressed the school with the complete authority of a man who has decided that the full truth spoken clearly to the assembled people who need to hear it is both the ethical and the strategic choice. He did not soften it. He said that the tournament had been used by a follower of Voldemort as a mechanism to restore a dark wizard whose name he spoke clearly and without the usual hedging that most of the wizarding world employed. He said 2 champions had been sent to a graveyard where this restoration had been attempted. He said the restoration had failed. He said both champions had returned. He said the evidence was documented and was already in the hands of sources that could not be managed or suppressed, which was directed less at the assembled students than at the 3 or 4 ministry officials present whose expressions had gone through several uncomfortable states during his address. He said that Hogwarts was, as it had always been, a place where the truth was valued over the comfort of ignoring it. The hall was very quiet. Then he said the scores. Harry had honestly forgotten about the scores, which was probably the most normal thing that had happened to him all week. Hermione had forgotten them too, or had set them aside with the practicality of someone who knew where the priorities were. But Dumbledore read them out with the care of someone who understood that the tournament had been real for 5 people regardless of what had happened around it, and that its conclusion deserved acknowledgement. Final standing: Hermione Granger first with 145 points, Harry Potter second with 143, Cedric Diggory third with 128 points, Victor Crumb fourth with 121, Fleur de Lacour fifth with 116. Hogwarts had won the tournament. The Triwizard Cup, now understood by everyone in the hall to be something other than what the tournament had intended it to be, was not, in the end, awarded to anyone. Dumbledore made the quiet judgment that an object that had been used as a weapon should not be treated as a prize, and no one present argued with him. The applause was for all 5 of them, and it was sustained and genuine. Cedric grinned his uncomplicated grin. Fleur inclined her head with the grace of someone accepting exactly what was being offered, and no more. Crumb stood still and looked at a middle distance, and allowed the moment without performing it. Harry looked at the hall, all the faces, the specific mixture of frightened and brave and uncertain and ready that was Hogwarts, always the quality of a place that had spent 8 centuries being exactly what it was supposed to be, and he felt the castle around them, the specific awareness of it, the deep old presence in the stone. Hermione was beside him. She had been beside him for the whole ceremony, and she was still there, and Harry thought, of course she is. Some things were just true. Some things had become true over the course of a year, with the gradual inevitability of certainty accumulating, and you could look back at the specific moments, the library, the corridor, the graveyard, the hand offered before the portkey, and see the shape of them clearly from where you were standing now. The ceremony ended. The school dispersed. In the movement of people and the noise of families reuniting and students comparing versions of the evening, Harry and Hermione stood at the edge of the hall, and it was very briefly just the 2 of them before Ron found them and Sirius appeared and the world came back with its usual density. "First place," Harry said. "By 2 points, she said. 2 points is not a close margin. 2 points in a competition of this scope with this scoring system is an extremely—" She stopped. Looked at him. "You're winding me up." "A little," he said. She exhaled, a small, real, somewhat exhausted laugh. "First place," she said, trying it out the way she'd tried things out all year, carefully, honestly, allowing herself to have it. "I came first in the Triwizard Tournament." "You did. The youngest champion to ever win, and the first time a Hogwarts champion has." She stopped again. "I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to catalogue it." "Why not?" "Because it'll make me cry," she said with the brisk honesty that was one of his favorite things about her, "and I'd prefer to do that in private." She looked at him directly. Second place," he agreed. "Next time." "There's not going to be a next time, hopefully. Next time I'm setting you a harder preparation schedule." "Hermione, we survived Voldemort in a graveyard." "Which is exactly why next time needs a harder preparation schedule," she said, and she was almost laughing again, the real kind, and Harry thought, yes, this is the thing. The hall was emptying around them. The candles were doing their late work, the enchanted ceiling showing a clear June night, the stars properly visible for the first time in weeks through whatever magic Flitwick had applied in preparation for the ceremony. "Next year," Hermione said. She said it looking at the ceiling, at the stars through the stone-filtered magic of Hogwarts, her voice shifting from almost laughing to something more serious and more careful. "Voldemort will try again, we both know that. What happened in the graveyard stopped the plan, it didn't stop him. He's out there somewhere, diminished, but alive," Harry said. "Alive," she confirmed. "Which means this year was the beginning, not the end." She looked at him. "Are you ready for that?" He thought about it. He thought about the graveyard and the thing in Wormtail's arms and the red eyes, and the voice that had said you cannot always have someone beside you. And he thought about the fact that he'd proved it wrong on the first attempt. And he thought about the castle and its ancient choice and the year that had built the 2 of them into something more specific and capable than either of them had been in September. "Are you?" he said. She held his gaze. In her expression was everything she'd learned to be this year, not the addition of it, the integration of it. Hermione Granger, who had always been this capable and was now fully, publicly, completely sure of it. The person the castle had recognized and chosen and been right about. "Yes," she said, simply and completely. "Then yeah," he said, "I am." The stars through the enchanted ceiling were very bright, and the castle breathed around them with its old, patient, particular warmth, and somewhere in the deep structure of the stone, in the places where the founder's magic had been laid and the years had accumulated and the selector's flame had burned once more after 4 centuries of silence, something settled, like a thing that has been waiting a long time to see what it chose, like something that had finally seen enough to be certain. Like a very old building that had looked at the world and decided two together, these two, and been right. 3 days before the end of term, Harry went to the 7th floor alone. Not the room of requirement, he wasn't thinking about it, not specifically, not with a need in mind. He walked the corridor with the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy and his performing bears, the one he and Hermione had used all year, and he walked it with the particular quality of someone saying goodbye to a version of themselves that had lived here, in this corridor, in these late evenings, practicing for things that had turned out to matter more than any preparation could fully account for. The castle was quiet around him. The end of term had that quality, the year winding down, the students already half elsewhere in their minds, the enormous building beginning its gradual shift from school to something that rested and waited. He stopped in the corridor and leaned against the wall and looked at the tapestry. "I know you were watching," he said, not loudly, not performing, just saying the true thing. The corridor was still. "I'm not sure what you expected from us," he continued. "Whatever it was, I hope we did it." "I think we did some of it." He paused. "There's more coming, you know that, I know that." He looked at the stone ceiling, the vaulting he'd walked under for 4 years without fully understanding what was above it. "I don't know what you are exactly, what kind of awareness you have, whether you think about things the way I think about things." He was quiet for a moment. "But thanks for choosing us, for knowing we were what was needed before we did." The warmth came. The draft from nowhere, the scent of old stone and something burning well in a deep grate, and the torch in the bracket nearest him did the thing it had done before, brightened briefly, just enough to be unambiguous, just enough to be an answer. Harry pushed off the wall. He'd told Hermione he'd meet her in the library. She was compiling her research notes into something comprehensive and organized, that she was half-seriously calling a preliminary examination of the Selector's Flame and its implications for pre-modern Hogwarts enchantment, which she told him was not for publication yet but was for when this is over and someone needs to understand how it worked. He told her he'd come help, which meant he'd sit across from her and read the sections she handed him and tell her when something was unclear, which she accepted as a contribution even if she didn't say so. He walked toward the staircase. The castle moved it toward him before he'd finished raising his foot to take the first step, depositing the correct staircase at the exact landing with the efficiency of something that had been doing this all year and had developed opinions about optimal routing. "Bit obvious," Harry said. The staircase made no response to this because it was a staircase. But as Harry walked down it, the warmth followed him for 3 flights before it settled back into the stone, and the library was lit and warm when he arrived, and Hermione looked up from her notes with the expression she had when she was working well and was pleased to see him, and Harry sat down across from her and she handed him 14 pages of dense, annotated analysis without preamble. He started reading. The castle, all 8 centuries of it, settled around them, the warm, old-aware presence of a place that had chosen well and knew it, that had waited a long time for the right people in the right moment and found them and watched them prove themselves and was now simply present as it had always been, as it would always be, doing what it had been built to do, being home, being the place where the thing that needed to be preserved was preserved. Watching the 2 students at the library table, the boy with his scar and his specific stubborn courage, the girl with her notes and her total refusal to be anything less than what she was, and knowing with the patient, stone-deep certainty of something that measures time in centuries rather than years that it had chosen correctly, that it would choose them again, that it already had.